Welcome to Tales in the Dark. I know many of you enjoy relaxing with these videos, so I recommend turning down the volume until my voice is barely audible. It'll make the experience even more soothing. Before you close your eyes, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Over 99% of viewers aren't subscribed. It costs you nothing, but it's an enormous support for us to keep creating these relaxing stories. Thank you and enjoy listening. Story 1. The sound of rain against the ancient windows created a gentle melody as I settled into the oversized leather armchair, a warm cup of chamomile tea nestled between my palms. The grand Victorian mansion loomed around me, its high ceilings and ornate moldings casting subtle shadows in the dim evening light. I had accepted this house-sitting position without hesitation. 3 months of solitude in a beautiful historic home seemed like the perfect opportunity to work on my novel. The wood paneling gleamed with generations of polish, and delicate lace curtains filtered the fading daylight. As I gazed around the sitting room, I noticed how the antique furniture seemed to hold stories within its weathered surfaces. A massive grandfather clock stood sentinel in the corner, its steady heartbeat marking time with methodical precision. That first evening, I explored the house room by room, familiarizing myself with its layout. My footsteps echoed softly on hardwood floors as I wandered through the library, my fingers trailing along leather-bound books whose spines bore titles in faded gold leaf. The kitchen retained its original features: a massive iron stove, copper pots hanging from ceiling hooks, and cabinets with beveled glass that caught and scattered light in unexpected ways. As night descended, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof in a soothing rhythm. I had just settled into bed in the guest room when I first heard it, a soft creak from somewhere below, like someone stepping carefully on an old floorboard. I reminded myself that historic homes made all sorts of noises as they settled, especially during rainfall. Still, I found myself holding my breath, listening intently. The sound didn't repeat, but as I lay there in the darkness, I became aware of other subtle noises: the whisper of wind through unseen gaps, the gentle tapping of tree branches against windows, and sometimes what seemed like the rustle of fabric from the hallway. Sleep came eventually, but my dreams were filled with half-formed shadows and distant whispers. Morning brought sunshine streaming through tall windows, and I laughed at my nighttime imaginings. I spent the day writing, positioned at an antique desk near a bay window overlooking the gardens. The words flowed easily, inspired perhaps by the atmospheric setting. As evening approached, I noticed something odd. A painting of a young woman in Victorian dress that I distinctly remembered hanging in the dining room now adorned the wall of the study where I worked. I wondered if my memory was playing tricks on me. That night, I heard footsteps again, more distinct this time. They moved with purpose through the first floor, then ascended the main staircase. I lay perfectly still, my heart beating steadily as I listened. The steps continued down the hallway, past my door, and seemed to enter the master bedroom at the end of the corridor. When I checked the next morning, the door was locked, just as the owners had left it. Days passed in a similar pattern. During daylight hours, the house was a peaceful haven for my writing. But as darkness fell, subtle changes would manifest. A chair shifted slightly from its usual position, books rearranged on shelves, the faint scent of lavender perfume wafting through empty rooms. Once I found a handwritten note in beautiful cursive script on my desk, but when I reached for it, I realized it was just a shadow cast by the curtains. The portrait of the Victorian woman continued its mysterious journey through the house. I would find it in different rooms each morning, though I never heard it being moved. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I caught what seemed like movement within the painting itself. A slight turn of the head, a subtle shift in expression. But whenever I looked directly at it, the image remained static, the woman's gentle smile unchanged. One particularly quiet evening, as I sat reading in the library, soft piano music drifted through the house. The notes were faint but clear, playing a melancholic melody I didn't recognize. I followed the sound to the music room, where an old grand piano stood silent and dust-free. The music stopped as I entered, but the keys seemed to hold a lingering warmth, as if recently touched. In my third week at the house, I discovered a journal hidden behind some books in the library. Its pages contained entries from a young woman who had lived in the house during the previous century. She wrote of music and art, of quiet evenings spent reading, and of a deep contentment found within these walls. The last entry spoke of never wanting to leave, of finding a way to remain forever in the home she loved so dearly. The strangest experiences always came in those liminal moments between wakefulness and sleep. Sometimes I would hear humming, soft and sweet, from somewhere nearby. Other times I felt a gentle pressure at the foot of my bed, as if someone had sat down beside me. Rather than fear, these moments brought an inexplicable sense of peace, as if the house itself was offering comfort. As the weeks passed, I began to understand that I wasn't alone in the house, but I wasn't afraid. Whatever presence shared these spaces with me seemed benevolent, perhaps even protective. The footsteps at night became familiar, like the sound of a friend puttering around their home. The moving painting felt less like a mystery and more like a gentle game between old acquaintances. Each morning, I would find my manuscript pages carefully straightened on the desk, though I often left them scattered the night before. Sometimes new passages appeared in my work, written in flowing script that seemed to fade away when examined too closely. These additions were always beautiful, adding depth and texture to my story in ways I hadn't considered. On my final night in the house, I sat in the same armchair where I had begun my stay. The rain had returned, creating that same soothing melody against the windows. In the corner of my eye, I saw a figure in a Victorian dress pass through the doorway, but I didn't turn to look. Instead, I smiled and whispered a quiet thank you to the empty room. The scent of lavender filled the air, and for a moment, the atmosphere grew thick with unspoken farewells. As I packed my belongings the next morning, I noticed the portrait had returned to its original place in the dining room. The woman's smile seemed different somehow, warmer, more knowing. I took one last look around the grand old house, understanding now that some places hold more than just memories. Sometimes they hold pieces of all the souls who have loved them, creating a tapestry of shared experiences that transcend time. I left my key on the entryway table and closed the heavy front door behind me. As I walked down the path, I glanced back at the house. In an upper window, I caught a glimpse of something, perhaps a curtain moving, or maybe a figure in a Victorian dress. But when I looked again, I saw only my own reflection in the glass, distorted by the morning light. The house stood silent and dignified, keeping its secrets for the next caretaker who would call it home. Story 2. The gentle rustling of leaves filled the cool morning air as I checked my gear one final time. 20 years of hiking experience had taught me to be meticulous about preparation. My weathered backpack contained everything I needed: compass, maps, first aid kit, water, and enough provisions for 3 days, though I had planned only a day hike through familiar terrain. The forest welcomed me with its familiar embrace, morning mist still clinging to the ancient trees. Shafts of early sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating patterns on the moss-covered ground. The air carried the sweet scent of pine needles and damp earth, a scent that had always felt like home to me. Hours passed as I followed the trail, marking my progress on the map. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth thicker. Something felt different about these woods today. The bird songs that usually accompanied my hikes had grown fewer, replaced by an unusual stillness. I consulted my compass, frowning slightly as the needle swayed erratically. The mist began to thicken, wrapping around the trees like soft cotton. My steps slowed as I realized the landmarks no longer matched my map. The thick carpet of fallen leaves muffled my footsteps, creating an oddly peaceful sensation despite my growing concern. I had never lost my way before, not in 2 decades of hiking. A gentle wind whispered through the branches, carrying an unfamiliar metallic scent that seemed out of place in the natural environment. Following my instincts, I moved toward its source, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The trees here seemed older, their bark darker and more gnarled, covered in unusual patterns of moss that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light. As I pushed through a dense patch of ferns, I discovered a small clearing. At its center stood a structure that seemed to defy reality, a concrete building, its walls partially reclaimed by nature. Vines embraced the corners, and moss carpeted the roof, making it appear as if it had grown from the forest floor itself. The door hung slightly ajar, its surface marked with faded warning signs too weathered to read. The metallic scent grew stronger here, mixing with the musty smell of abandonment. My hand touched the cool metal of the door, and it swung open with surprising smoothness, revealing a darkness that seemed to breathe. Inside, emergency lights still glowed with a soft blue radiance, powered by some unknown source. The air felt different here, cooler, drier, with an underlying scent of old paper and electronics. Long corridors branched off in several directions, their floors covered in a thin layer of dust that showed no footprints but my own. The walls held old computer terminals, their screens dark but somehow not dead. As I passed, one flickered to life, casting a pale green glow across the room. Numbers and letters scrolled across the screen in endless sequences, making patterns that almost seemed to make sense if I looked at them long enough. In what appeared to be a central laboratory, I found journals and papers scattered across desks, their pages filled with handwritten notes and complex diagrams. The ink had faded to a soft brown, but the writing remained legible. Words and phrases caught my attention. Quantum displacement, temporal variance, forest resonance patterns. A soft humming emanated from somewhere deep within the facility, barely perceptible but constant. It seemed to resonate with something inside me, creating a sensation of peaceful alertness. Time began to feel fluid, like water flowing around stones in a stream. The deeper I ventured, the more questions arose. Specimen containers lined the shelves, filled with preserved plants I had never seen before. Their leaves and flowers showed impossible colors, as if they had grown in some other reality. Research notes described experiments with the forest itself, suggesting connections between the trees that went far beyond ordinary root systems. In one room, a large map covered an entire wall, showing the forest but with overlays I didn't understand. Lines of force, energy patterns, and convergence points created a complex web across the familiar terrain. My current location was marked with a symbol that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. As I studied the documents and artifacts around me, I began to understand that this facility had been dedicated to studying something ancient within the forest, something that defied conventional science. The researchers had discovered patterns in the way the forest communicated, suggesting an intelligence that spanned centuries. The humming grew softer, almost musical, as daylight faded outside. The emergency lights seemed brighter now, casting soft shadows that moved in ways that didn't quite match my movements. In one corner, a terminal displayed weather data from what appeared to be multiple timelines, showing patterns of storms and seasonal changes that overlapped and diverged. When I finally decided to leave, I found my way back to the entrance with surprising ease, as if the facility itself was guiding me. The forest outside had grown dark, but a soft luminescence from the moss lit my path. My compass now pointed true north again, though something told me it hadn't been wrong before. The facility simply existed in a place where conventional direction held less meaning. I made my way back through the forest, guided by stars that seemed both familiar and slightly changed. The night air carried whispers of ancient secrets, and the trees seemed to watch my passage with patient wisdom. My map now showed marks and notations I didn't remember making, yet they led me unerringly toward home. The next morning, I tried to retrace my steps to the facility. Despite my careful notes and marked map, the path seemed to shift and change. The clearing remained hidden, perhaps existing in a fold of space and time that only revealed itself under certain conditions. Sometimes now, on quiet nights, I hear that distant humming in my dreams. The forest has never felt quite the same since that day. Not darker or lighter, just different, as if I'm now aware of a conversation that has been ongoing for millennia. My compass occasionally wavers, especially during full moons, and I've noticed patterns in the moss that seem to form familiar equations. I continue my hikes, carrying a journal to document any unusual observations. The forest feels more alive now, more aware. And sometimes, when the mist rolls in and the birds grow quiet, I wonder if the facility will reveal itself to me again, offering more glimpses into the ancient mysteries that live among the trees. My fellow hikers often ask why I seem so at peace in these woods, even in the deepest dark of night. I simply smile, knowing that what others might find unsettling about the forest's mysteries has become a source of profound comfort. The unknown doesn't always need to frighten us. Sometimes it simply invites us to listen more carefully to the quiet wisdom that surrounds us. Story 3. The steady hum of fluorescent lights fills the empty corridors as I make my nightly rounds through the mall. After 5 years as a security guard here, I've grown accustomed to the peculiar atmosphere that settles in after closing time. The gentle whirring of escalators, powered down for the night, creates a soothing white noise that accompanies my footsteps. Tonight feels different somehow. The air holds a certain weight, like the heaviness before rainfall, though I know the weather forecast promised clear skies. My flashlight beam traces familiar patterns across the polished floor, reflecting off the darkened storefront windows where mannequins stand in frozen poses, their shadows stretching long and thin against the back walls. I pause near the central fountain, now still and silent. During the day, this space buzzes with life. Children tossing coins, teenagers laughing, elderly couples resting on nearby benches. At night, the water's surface becomes a perfect mirror, reflecting the moonlight that filters through the glass ceiling high above. My watch shows 1:15 a.m. 4 more hours until the morning cleaning crew arrives. A soft sound catches my attention, perhaps the settling of the building, or maybe something more. In this job, you learn to distinguish between the normal nighttime sounds and those that require investigation. This one falls into the latter category. It reminds me of fabric brushing against fabric, like someone walking while wearing loose clothing. I turn toward the north wing, where the sounds seem to originate. The beam of my flashlight reveals nothing unusual, just the familiar lineup of closed shops, the bookstore with its window display of bestsellers, the jewelry store's diamonds catching and scattering light, the clothing boutique with its artfully arranged scarves and dresses. Moving closer to investigate, I notice something subtle but wrong. One of the mannequins in the boutique window stands at an odd angle, turned about 30 degrees from its usual position. I know because I've walked past this display hundreds of times. Security guards develop an eye for details, for things out of place. My radio crackles softly at my hip, making me jump slightly. But it's just static, a common occurrence in certain parts of the building. I reach down to adjust the volume, and when I look up again, I freeze. The mannequin has moved again, now facing directly toward the window, toward me. The rational part of my mind searches for explanations. Perhaps the display staff forgot to secure it properly. Maybe vibrations from the ventilation system caused it to rotate on its base. But deep down, I know neither explanation fits. I've worked retail before. Mannequins don't just turn by themselves. I key my radio, meaning to call into central security, but pause before pressing the talk button. What would I say? That I'm spooked by a mannequin? Instead, I draw closer to the window, my flashlight beam steady on the figure. Its blank face reveals nothing, but its pose suggests movement arrested mid-step. A flicker of movement reflects in the window glass, something behind me. I turn slowly, sweeping my light across the open mall space. Nothing moves in the beam, but I notice the fountain has started running, water trickling down its tiers in a gentle cascade. This shouldn't be possible. The fountain systems are on strict timers, controlled by the mall's central computer. My footsteps echo as I approach the fountain. The water flows crystal clear in my flashlight beam, creating patterns of light and shadow on the surrounding floor. The sound should be soothing, but instead it raises the hair on my neck. Because beneath the water's gentle music, I hear something else. Footsteps, soft but distinct, moving somewhere in the darkness beyond my light's reach. I stand very still, listening. The steps continue, unhurried, moving in what sounds like a circle around my position. They have an odd quality to them, as if the walker's feet aren't quite touching the ground properly, like someone trying to move naturally while walking on tiptoe. Security, I call out, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The mall is closed. Identify yourself. The footsteps stop. The fountain continues its gentle song. And then from the darkness comes a sound that makes my blood run cold. The soft scrape of plastic on plastic, multiplied many times over, like dozens of mannequins turning on their bases all at once. My flashlight beam darts from window to window. In each display, the mannequins have changed position. Some have turned to face me. Others appear to have stepped closer to the glass. Their blank faces somehow seem more intent now, more aware. My light catches a subtle movement, one mannequin's fingers slowly curling into a fist. I begin backing toward the security office, keeping my light moving between the windows. More scraping sounds echo through the darkness. From the corner of my eye, I catch a flash of movement. A white hand pressing against a window from the inside of a shop, whose gate I know I locked hours ago. The fountain's flow increases, the sound of rushing water growing louder. A cool mist fills the air, carrying an odd scent. Not the usual chlorine smell, but something artificial, like new plastic mixed with fabric dye. My uniform feels damp, clinging to my skin. I reach the security office door and fumble with my keys, unwilling to take my eyes off the darkened mall. The scraping sounds grow closer. My flashlight beam catches something that stops my breath. A mannequin standing in the middle of the corridor, 30 feet away. Its head tilts slightly as I watch, a movement so subtle I might have imagined it. Finally, my key finds the lock. I practically fall into the office, slamming the door behind me. The security monitors flicker to life as I drop into my chair, showing feeds from cameras throughout the mall. What I see makes my hands shake as I reach for the phone to call for backup. Every mannequin is out of place now. They stand in the corridors in groups of 2 or 3, all facing the security office. On one screen I watch as a mannequin moves, not the jerky motion you'd expect, but a smooth, almost elegant step forward. Others begin to move as well, their procession silent and purposeful. The phone line gives me nothing but static. The radio too remains silent, no matter which channel I try. Outside my office, the fountain roars like a waterfall, its mist seeping under the door in tendrils that smell of plastic and paint. I sit in my chair, watching the monitors as the mannequins draw closer. Their blank faces betray no emotion, no intent. Yet somehow I know they're aware. Aware of me, aware of themselves, aware of this strange night that has transformed them from mere display pieces into something else entirely. The office lights flicker, and in that moment of darkness, I hear a gentle tapping on my door. When the lights stabilize, the security monitors show an empty corridor, no mannequins in sight. But I know they're still there, waiting just out of view of the cameras. The tapping comes again, more insistent this time, accompanied by the whisper of plastic fingers sliding down the door's surface. I check my watch again, 3:45 a.m., just over an hour until the cleaning crew arrives. I lean back in my chair, oddly calm now despite my racing heart. The mannequins continue their gentle tapping, a rhythm that almost matches my pulse. And I wonder, as the mist curls around my feet, what stories the morning crew will find when they arrive, if they arrive at all. Story 4. The gentle patter of rain against canvas had been my lullaby for the past 2 nights, but this evening felt different. Perhaps it was the way the droplets seemed to whisper secrets, or how the moisture hung thick in the air, carrying unfamiliar scents through our camping spot deep in the ancient forest. My wife Sarah slept peacefully beside me, her breathing steady and rhythmic, a counterpoint to the symphony of night sounds that surrounded us. I lay awake, watching shadows dance across the tent's fabric, cast by the dying embers of our campfire. The wilderness had always been our sanctuary, a place where we could escape the digital chains of modern life. But tonight something felt off-kilter, like a painting hung slightly askew. The first anomaly was subtle, a change in the cricket song that had accompanied us since sunset. Their chorus didn't fade gradually, it simply stopped, as if someone had pressed pause on nature's soundtrack. In that newfound silence, I became aware of other sounds, the soft crunch of pine needles under careful footsteps, the rustle of branches being parted deliberately. My heart maintained its steady rhythm, but my senses heightened, tuning into every whisper of movement outside our tent. Sarah stirred slightly, and I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a silent request to stay quiet. She'd always been the more intuitive of us both, and even in her semi-conscious state, she understood. Through the thin fabric of our tent, I could make out moving shadows, not the familiar swaying of branches in the breeze, but purposeful movements. Multiple figures passed by our camp, their outlines suggesting they carried something long and rigid. In the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy, metal glinted briefly. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness, her grip firm but not panicked. We'd spent enough time in the wilderness to know that wild animals don't move with such coordination, don't carry objects that reflect moonlight. These were people, and they weren't fellow campers taking a midnight stroll. Time seemed to flow like honey as we lay there, barely breathing, listening to the soft footfalls and occasional whispered commands. The voices were too low to make out words, but their tone carried purpose and authority. This wasn't a chance encounter. These people knew exactly where they were going. As the sounds began to fade into the distance, Sarah squeezed my hand 3 times, our old signal for "we need to move." We'd developed a whole language of hand squeezes during our years of climbing and hiking together, a way to communicate without words when words might betray our presence. With movements practiced through countless camping trips, we silently slipped from our sleeping bags. Every rustle of fabric seemed thunderous in the quiet night, but we maintained our slow, deliberate pace. Panic makes noise. Patience brings silence. Through a small gap in the tent flap, I could see flashlight beams dancing between the trees, moving away from us but not far enough for comfort. Their direction seemed purposeful, heading deeper into the forest where the terrain grew rougher and the undergrowth more dense. Sarah tapped my shoulder, 2 quick touches followed by a pause, then 3 more. Someone behind us. I didn't need to turn to know she was right. The faint scent of cigarette smoke had already reached my nostrils, carried on the damp night air. We froze, becoming part of the darkness inside our tent. The smokers' footsteps were unhurried, confident. They passed within feet of our camp, close enough that we could hear the wet crunch of leaves under heavy boots. The ember of their cigarette painted a small circle of orange light through our tent wall, like a tiny, malevolent sun. When the footsteps faded, Sarah and I moved with shared purpose. We'd packed light for this trip, a blessing now as we silently gathered our essential gear. Everything went into our packs with practiced efficiency: water, energy bars, first aid kit, compass. The sleeping bags would have to stay. They were too bulky, too noisy. The rain had picked up again, nature providing cover for our careful exit. We slipped out of the tent like shadows, our dark rain gear blending with the night. The forest floor was soft under our boots, dampening our footfalls as we moved away from our camp, opposite the direction the group had taken. In the distance, a generator rumbled to life, its mechanical drone oddly obscene in the natural silence. Light bloomed behind us, powerful enough to paint the treetops in artificial day. Voices carried on the wind, more of them now, no longer bothering with whispers. We picked our way through the undergrowth, using every trick we'd learned about moving quietly in the wilderness. Sarah led the way, her innate sense of direction keeping us on course even without clear trails or landmarks. The rain masked our movement, but it also made the ground treacherous, every step a careful negotiation between speed and silence. A new sound cut through the night, the distinctive whop 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 of helicopter blades. The aircraft was flying low, its searchlight sweeping the canopy. We pressed ourselves against a large cedar, its rough bark digging into our backs as the light passed overhead. The helicopter's presence confirmed our unspoken fears. This was no small operation we'd stumbled upon. Hours passed as we made our way through the darkness. The generator's drone faded, but we couldn't shake the feeling of being pursued. Every snapped twig behind us, every rustle in the undergrowth carried the potential for discovery. The forest that had been our playground now felt like a maze, with unknown dangers lurking around every turn. Dawn found us several miles from our camp, exhausted but alive. The early morning mist created ghostly shapes among the trees, and the first birds began their morning songs. We allowed ourselves a brief rest, sharing a water bottle and an energy bar, our backs pressed against a fallen log. Sarah pulled out our compass, confirming what we both suspected. We'd been moving steadily downhill, away from the higher ground where we'd encountered the group. The morning light revealed bruises on our arms and legs from unseen obstacles in the night, badges of our silent flight through the darkness. Looking back now, I still wonder about what we left behind in those woods. Our tent probably still stands there, a lonely sentinel in a clearing that holds more secrets than we'll ever know. Sometimes, on quiet nights when rain taps against our bedroom window, I find myself back in that moment of first awakening, when the cricket song stopped and the night held its breath. We never reported what we saw. How could we explain our presence in an unmarked section of wilderness, far from any official camping grounds? What could we say about the armed figures in the night, the helicopter, the generator's hum? Some mysteries are better left in the forest, wrapped in rain and darkness, told only in whispers between two people who know the value of silence. The wilderness still calls to us, but we're more careful now about answering. We research our camping spots thoroughly, stick to marked trails, and always listen to the cricket song. When it stops, we move. Some lessons once learned become part of your bones, as natural as breathing, as vital as silence in the dark. Story 5. The gentle hum of my truck's engine had been my only companion for the past 12 hours. Rain tapped softly against the windshield, creating a soothing rhythm that matched the steady sweep of my wipers. The night stretched endlessly before me, my headlights cutting through the misty darkness of the remote highway. I had always found peace in these solitary drives. The subtle vibration of the steering wheel beneath my palms, the warm glow of dashboard lights, and the occasional flash of reflective signs marking the miles. These were the constants of my world. The cab of my truck was a sanctuary, floating through the darkness like a ship on a calm sea. That evening, the air held a peculiar quality, thick with anticipation. The moon, nearly full, played hide-and-seek behind scattered clouds, casting shifting shadows across the empty road. My radio hummed quietly, playing old country songs that seemed to drift in and out like distant memories. Through my side mirror, I noticed a figure materialize from the darkness. A lone person standing by the roadside, thumb extended in the universal gesture of the hitchhiker. In 15 years of driving, I'd passed countless such figures, but something about this one made me ease off the accelerator. Perhaps it was the quietness of the night, or maybe the strange melancholy that had settled over me during the long hours of solitude. Whatever the reason, I found myself pulling over, the truck's air brakes letting out a soft hiss as we came to a stop. The figure approached slowly, their features gradually becoming clearer in my side mirror. A man in a well-worn suit, carrying nothing but a small leather briefcase. His face held a gentle expression that seemed oddly familiar, though I knew we'd never met. "Evening," he said softly as he climbed into the passenger seat. His voice carried a distant quality, like music played in another room. "Thank you for stopping." The cab filled with an unfamiliar scent, something like old books and autumn leaves. My new passenger sat perfectly still, briefcase balanced on his lap, hands folded neatly over it. In the dim light, I noticed his suit had an old-fashioned cut to it, the kind you might see in photographs from decades past. "Where are you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the empty highway. "Forward," he replied with a slight smile. "Always forward." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the rain creating patterns on the windows. The stranger's presence felt both unsettling and oddly natural, like a dream you're not quite sure you're having. In my peripheral vision, I noticed something peculiar. When the moonlight struck him just right, his outline seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer pavement. But when I turned to look directly, he appeared solid and ordinary. "You've been driving this route a long time," he said. It wasn't a question. 15 years, I confirmed, wondering how he knew. "I've seen you pass," he nodded. "Many nights, many roads, always careful, always kind to fellow travelers." A chill ran down my spine, though the cab was warm. In my mirrors, I noticed headlights appearing in the distance behind us, growing larger with unusual speed. "We have company," my passenger remarked calmly. "They've been following me for quite some time." The approaching vehicle was closing fast, its high beams flooding my cab with harsh light. My passenger remained unperturbed, but his hands tightened slightly on his briefcase. "I apologize for involving you in this," he said softly, "but perhaps it's not entirely by chance that you stopped tonight." The pursuing vehicle was nearly upon us now, engine roaring. My heart should have been racing, but instead, I felt an unexpected calm wash over me. The stranger beside me radiated a peaceful energy that seemed to fill the entire cab. "Take the next turn," he suggested gently, "the old logging road." Without questioning why, I turned onto the narrow dirt road that I'd passed hundreds of times but never explored. The truck's headlights revealed tall trees pressing in on both sides, their branches creating strange shadows that danced across our path. The vehicle behind us passed the turnoff, its lights disappearing into the distance. The sound of its engine faded, replaced by the soft patter of rain on leaves above us. "Time is a curious thing," my passenger mused, opening his briefcase. Inside, I glimpsed something that glowed with a soft, pearl-like luminescence. "Some say it moves like a river, always forward. But rivers have many branches, many paths to the same sea." He closed the briefcase, and I realized we had stopped moving, though I couldn't remember applying the brakes. The engine idled quietly, and rain drummed steadily on the roof. "Thank you for the ride," he said, reaching for the door handle, "and for all the others you'll give to those who need them most." Before I could respond, he stepped out into the rain. I watched him walk away from the truck, his figure growing indistinct in the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw him fade away entirely, like mist in morning sunlight. But that couldn't be right, could it? I sat there for a long while, listening to the rain and the quiet rumble of my engine. When I finally put the truck in gear and turned around, I found myself back on the main highway, though I couldn't quite remember how I'd gotten there. The rest of my drive passed uneventfully, but something had changed. The solitude felt different now, charged with possibility. Every now and then, I catch glimpses of something in my mirrors. A familiar figure standing by the roadside, or a well-worn briefcase catching the light just so. And sometimes, on nights when the moon plays hide and seek with the clouds, I wonder about my mysterious passenger and all the other travelers making their way through the darkness, each following their own branch of the river. Even now, years later, I can never be quite sure if I dreamed that entire night. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone and the rain is falling soft and steady, I catch that scent again, old books and autumn leaves, and I know that somewhere out there, my passenger is still traveling, always forward, always seeking kind souls willing to share their journey, if only for a little while. Story 6. The soft patter of rain against my windshield created a gentle rhythm, almost hypnotic in its steadiness. I had been driving for hours through winding back roads, watching the daylight slowly fade into a misty twilight. The weather matched my contemplative mood perfectly, not stormy enough to be threatening, just a continuous drizzle that painted everything in muted shades of gray and blue. My car had been making peculiar noises for the past 20 minutes, subtle at first but growing increasingly persistent. The sound reminded me of a whispered conversation, barely audible yet impossible to ignore. When the engine finally gave out, it wasn't with a dramatic bang or screech, but rather a gradual decline into silence, like someone drifting off to sleep. I guided the vehicle to the shoulder of the road, where tall pine trees loomed overhead, their branches creating a natural canopy that filtered the rain into a fine mist. The approaching evening cast long shadows across the dashboard, and I found myself mesmerized by the way the remaining light played through the water droplets on my windows, creating tiny prisms that danced with every passing breeze. My phone displayed no signal, not unusual for these remote roads. The peaceful solitude I had been enjoying during my drive suddenly felt a bit less comfortable. I sat there for a while, listening to the rhythm of the rain and watching occasional headlights appear and disappear in my rearview mirror, none of them slowing down. When the black SUV finally pulled up behind me, its headlights casting a soft glow through the rain, I felt equal parts relief and apprehension. The vehicle was well maintained, almost pristine, which seemed oddly out of place on these muddy back roads. The driver approached slowly, holding an umbrella that seemed unnecessarily formal for the gentle rainfall. He was middle-aged, dressed in what appeared to be business casual attire, crisp khakis and a blue button-down shirt that somehow remained unwrinkled despite the weather. His smile was gentle, almost paternal, and his voice carried a warmth that seemed to match the golden glow of his vehicle's headlights. "Car trouble?" he asked, maintaining a respectful distance from my window. "I noticed you've been pulled over for a while. I actually passed by earlier, but wanted to make sure you were all right." His consideration touched me, though something in the back of my mind questioned how he knew how long I'd been there if he'd only passed by once before. Still, his presence felt reassuring in the growing darkness. He offered to take a look under the hood, moving with the confident expertise of someone familiar with engines. As he worked, he spoke softly about the common problems that could cause such issues, his voice mixing with the rainfall in an almost musical way. The light from his SUV created interesting shadows as he moved, sometimes making him appear larger than he was, sometimes smaller. "I have a repair shop just a few miles down the road," he mentioned casually, wiping his hands on a pristinely white cloth that seemed to materialize from nowhere. "I could tow you there, get this fixed up properly. It's not safe out here after dark." The offer was tempting and his reasoning sound. Yet something about the situation felt off, like a painting hanging slightly askew. Nothing obviously wrong, but enough to draw your attention. Perhaps it was the way his clothes remained perfectly dry despite working in the rain, or how the white cloth stayed spotless even after he used it to clean his hands. I found myself studying his reflection in my side mirror as he worked. Sometimes, when he moved just right, the angle of the light made it seem like there was something else there, a different shape, a different shadow. But whenever I looked directly at him, everything appeared perfectly normal. He insisted on helping, his kindness becoming almost overwhelming. Each time I tried to politely decline, he had another reasonable argument ready. His voice remained soft, gentle, but his words carried an undertone of authority that made it increasingly difficult to refuse. The rain continued its gentle symphony against the car roof, but now it felt like it was playing a different melody, something minor key, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The shadows from his SUV's headlights seemed to stretch longer, darker, reaching toward my car like grasping fingers. I noticed he never introduced himself, never asked my name. His gestures were perfectly polite, his smile never wavering, yet his eyes seemed to reflect no light, like deep wells in his face. When he moved to the front of my car again, I caught a glimpse of his SUV's interior, empty, pristinely clean, with what appeared to be heavy-duty plastic covering the back seats. My instincts were screaming now, though nothing overtly threatening had occurred. His continued insistence on helping, the perfect precision of his movements, the way the rain seemed to avoid him, it all added up to something my mind couldn't quite grasp, but my body understood perfectly. I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell about creatures that looked human but weren't quite right, beings that could only mimic humanity, never quite getting the details perfect. She would point out the small things, how they never blinked quite right, how their clothes never wrinkled, how they appeared too perfect to be real. When he returned to my window, his smile unchanged, I noticed his shirt was still perfectly pressed, despite having bent over my engine multiple times. No wrinkles, no water spots, not a single crease out of place. His hair remained immaculate, and I realized I hadn't seen him blink once during our entire interaction. I made my decision then, starting my car with trembling fingers. To my surprise, the engine turned over immediately, purring as if nothing had ever been wrong. His smile widened slightly, showing too many teeth, all perfectly aligned. "Are you sure you won't follow me to the shop?" he asked one final time, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't noticed before. "It's really no trouble at all." I declined as politely as I could, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. As I pulled away, I watched in my rearview mirror as he stood perfectly still in the rain, that same smile fixed on his face, until the darkness swallowed him and his pristine SUV completely. Miles later, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel, I passed a small sign half hidden by overgrown vegetation. It marked the location of an auto repair shop, abandoned for what looked like decades, its windows dark and empty, watching the road like hungry eyes. In the weeks that followed, I often thought about that evening, about the man who was too perfect to be real, about the repair shop that couldn't possibly have been his. Sometimes on rainy nights, I catch myself looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see pristine headlights approaching, carrying with them a figure in unwrinkled clothes with an unchanging smile. I never drive those back roads anymore, but I often wonder about other stranded travelers, about pristine SUVs and helpful strangers who don't quite look right in the rain. I wonder how many people accepted his offer, followed those perfect headlights into the growing darkness, never to be seen again. The strangest part? When I had my car checked the next day, the mechanic found nothing wrong with it. No sign of any issue that could have caused it to break down. But he did find something odd. Under the hood, in the spaces where rainwater should have collected during that evening, there wasn't a single drop of moisture. It was completely, unnaturally dry, as if the rain itself had never existed. Story 7. I never intended to discover what lurked within those weathered walls. The abandoned factory had stood silent for decades, its brick facade gradually surrendering to nature's patient assault. Rain fell in a gentle rhythm against my jacket as I waited for my friends near the rusty gates, their metal frames reaching toward pewter clouds like skeletal fingers. Sarah arrived first, her boots splashing through shallow puddles as she approached. Mike and Jason followed shortly after, their hushed voices carrying across the empty parking lot. We had explored abandoned places before, but something about this massive industrial complex felt different. The air itself seemed charged with an electric anticipation. "Everyone brought their flashlights?" I whispered, though there was no real need for quiet. The factory stood isolated, surrounded by overgrown fields that stretched into the gathering dusk. My friends nodded, beams of light cutting through the deepening gloom. We found an entrance through a partially collapsed loading dock. The concrete floor was littered with decades of debris, fallen ceiling tiles, broken glass, and scattered papers turned to gray pulp by countless rains. Our footsteps echoed softly through vast empty spaces where machinery once hummed with industrial purpose. The building had a peculiar smell, not just the expected mustiness of abandonment, but something sharper underneath, a chemical tang that made my nose twitch. I tried to dismiss it, focusing instead on the fascinating play of light and shadow as we moved deeper into the structure. Sarah paused near a massive column, running her hand over faded safety warnings still visible on its surface. "Look at these old signs," she murmured. "This place must have been quite something in its day." That's when we heard it, a metallic scraping sound from somewhere above us, followed by what might have been footsteps. We froze, our lights fixed on the ceiling. The rational part of my mind suggested wind or settling metal, but my racing heart knew better. "Maybe we should check the upper floors," Mike suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "Could be other explorers up there." I wanted to say no, to suggest we leave while we still could. But curiosity overcame caution, and I found myself nodding. We located a sturdy-looking stairwell, its metal steps groaning softly under our weight as we ascended. The second floor opened into a vast space filled with shadows. Enormous windows lined the walls, their broken panes allowing pale evening light to filter through. As we moved forward, our lights revealed something unexpected, fresh tire tracks in the dust, leading to a section of the building that appeared more recently disturbed. "Someone's been here," Jason whispered, crouching to examine the marks. "Recently." Before we could discuss this discovery, a door slammed somewhere in the distance. This time there was no mistaking the sound of hurried footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. We quickly ducked behind a cluster of old machinery. Through gaps in the rusty equipment, we saw flashlight beams sweeping the area. Voices drifted toward us, speaking in harsh, clipped tones. I caught fragments of conversation about shipments and schedule changes. My heart pounded as realization dawned. We hadn't stumbled upon fellow explorers. These were people using the abandoned factory for something illegal. The chemical smell suddenly made terrible sense. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my jacket. More voices joined the first group, and we could hear heavy objects being moved. We needed to leave, but any movement risked giving away our position. The minutes stretched like hours as we crouched in our hiding place. My legs began to cramp, but fear kept me motionless. The workers, whoever they were, seemed focused on an area at the far end of the floor. Eventually, their voices and footsteps began to recede. We waited until silence returned before moving. Every step felt thunderous as we crept toward the stairwell. The journey down seemed to take forever, each metallic creak of the steps threatening to betray our presence. When we finally emerged into the cool night air, we ran. We didn't stop until we reached our cars, parked safely away from the factory grounds. Only then did we dare to speak, our voices shaking as we tried to process what we'd witnessed. Looking back at the looming structure, I noticed something I'd missed before, a faint light moving behind one of the upper windows. Someone was watching us leave. We never reported what we found that night. What could we say? We had no proof, and trespassing would have been difficult to explain. But I often think about that evening, about the secrets hidden within those decaying walls. Sometimes when I drive past the old factory, I see lights moving in the upper windows. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, I imagine I can hear the sound of vehicles arriving and departing, carrying mysterious cargo to unknown destinations. The building still stands, its dark windows staring out like vacant eyes across the landscape. It guards its secrets well, that place where innocent curiosity led us into brushing against something dangerous and unknown. I've never gone back inside, but in my dreams I still wander those shadowy halls, forever trying to escape the sound of approaching footsteps. The factory taught me something important that night. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. Not every abandoned place is truly empty, and sometimes the most dangerous discoveries are the ones we make by accident. Yet there are moments, usually late at night when sleep eludes me, that I find myself wondering about what really happens behind those weathered walls. What secrets still wait in the shadows of that old factory? Perhaps it's better not to know. Some questions are better left unanswered, some doors better left closed. But I can't help wondering if somewhere in that vast building, behind those dark windows, someone is watching me even now, wondering if I'll ever return to uncover the truth about what we found that rainy evening. Story 8. The soft hum of fluorescent lights accompanied my footsteps as I made my nightly rounds through the empty office building. As a night security guard, I had grown accustomed to the peaceful solitude that descended after sunset. The modern glass and steel structure stood 20 stories tall, its windows reflecting the pale moonlight like countless watching eyes. I enjoyed these quiet hours, walking through the maze of cubicles and conference rooms, checking doors and ensuring everything remained secure. The building had its own personality at night. The gentle whisper of the ventilation system, the occasional settling of walls, and the distant pulse of the city beyond our walls created a soothing symphony. That night started like any other. I signed in at 11, collected my flashlight and key card, and began my first patrol. The lobby's marble floors echoed beneath my feet as I walked past the security desk toward the elevator bank. The screens showing various camera feeds cast a blue glow across the polished surface, creating rippling patterns that danced with each step. The first few floors passed without incident. I methodically checked each door, marked my checkpoints, and maintained radio contact with Central Dispatch. The familiar routine brought comfort, like a well-worn path through a familiar forest. Yet something felt different tonight, a subtle shift in the building's atmosphere that I couldn't quite name. When I reached the 7th floor, I noticed the first anomaly. A desk lamp glowed in the darkness, its warm light a stark contrast to the usual emptiness. I approached carefully, my shoes silent on the carpet. The lamp belonged to Margaret from accounting. I recognized her family photos and the small ceramic cat collection that lined her desk. But Margaret always turned off her lamp. She was meticulous about such things. I reached for the switch, but hesitated. The surface of her desk showed signs of recent activity. Papers slightly askew, A chair pulled back at an angle, a half-empty coffee cup still warm to the touch. My pulse quickened slightly, though I maintained my composure. The security logs showed no one had accessed this floor for hours. The radio at my hip crackled softly, making me start. But it was only static, a common occurrence in certain parts of the building. I keyed the mic anyway, reporting the unusual finding to dispatch. No response came through the white noise. I made a mental note to document the radio dead zone in my nightly report. As I continued my rounds, more inconsistencies emerged. On the 10th floor, I found a copier running, printing blank pages that spilled onto the floor like fallen leaves. The 12th floor break room microwave displayed an endlessly blinking end message, though its interior was empty. Each discovery added another layer to my unease, like gentle brushstrokes building a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see. The 14th floor held the executive offices, their glass walls offering views of the surrounding cityscape. As I swept my flashlight across the space, movement caught my eye, a shadow passing between the offices, there and gone in an instant. My training took over, and I maintained my position, observing and listening. The ventilation system seemed louder here, its steady rhythm now carrying what sounded like whispered conversations. I could almost make out words, but they remained just beyond comprehension, like a radio tuned between stations. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms rise. I advanced carefully, checking each office methodically. The beam of my flashlight revealed empty spaces, but the reflections in the glass walls created endless mirrors, making it impossible to trust my peripheral vision. Every movement seemed multiplied. Every shadow doubled and redoubled until the space felt crowded with phantom activity. In the CEO's corner office, I found another desk lamp illuminated. This one cast strange shadows across the expensive artwork and modern furniture. A laptop hummed on the desk, its screen displaying an email client with a message half-written. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., nearly an hour after the building had been cleared and secured. My radio crackled again, this time producing a series of tones that almost formed a pattern. I tried calling dispatch once more, but the static had become a constant companion. The building's security systems should have detected any unauthorized entry, yet here was clear evidence of recent activity. The elevator chimed behind me, its soft bell cutting through the silence like a knife. I turned slowly, watching the floor indicator above the doors. The number changed steadily, 12, 13, 14. I held my position, flashlight trained on the elevator entrance. The doors opened with a whisper, revealing an empty car illuminated by flickering lights. As I approached the elevator, my flashlight beam revealed scuff marks on the floor leading inside, as if something heavy had been dragged. The elevator's panel showed multiple floors selected, numbers lit up like a constellation. 16, 18, 20, basement. Before I could react, the doors began to close. I backed away, choosing instead to take the stairs. My footsteps echoed in the concrete stairwell, each sound amplified and distorted. I descended carefully, listening for any signs of movement above or below. The emergency lights cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently of any source. Reaching the lobby level, I found the security desk monitors displaying only snow, their quiet hiss adding to the building's nocturnal symphony. My keycard failed at the front desk computer, the familiar green light replaced by an angry red flash. The backup system should have engaged, but the building remained eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Through the lobby's glass walls, I could see my patrol car where I had parked it hours earlier. The distance to the exit seemed to stretch impossibly long, the marble floor extending like a moonlit path. As I moved toward the doors, my radio sparked to life one final time. Through the static, I heard a voice, clear, calm, and terribly familiar. It was my own voice, reading out the night's security log. I froze, listening to myself describe events that hadn't yet occurred. The voice spoke of patrols on floors I hadn't reached, of incidents I hadn't yet discovered. And finally, it described my current position, standing in the lobby, listening to a radio transmission that couldn't exist. The lobby lights flickered once, plunging the space into momentary darkness. When they returned, I saw them reflected in the glass, dozens of figures standing in the offices above, their forms barely visible against the night sky. They moved in unison, pressing against the windows, watching. I knew then that my shift had truly begun. The building had awakened, and the long night stretched ahead, full of possibilities I had yet to discover. Sometimes I wonder if I ever left, or if I'm still there, endlessly patrolling those quiet halls, adding my own whispers to the building's nightly chorus. In the morning, they found the security desk occupied, the monitors functioning normally, the logs updated and complete. But the guard on duty wasn't me, though they said he looked exactly like me, down to the name tag and the way he held his flashlight. I watch him sometimes from behind the glass walls as he makes his rounds through the quiet building, unaware that he's being observed by eyes that understand too well the path that lies ahead. Story 9. The gentle patter of rain against the windows created a soothing rhythm as I settled into the plush armchair in the living room. The soft glow from my laptop screen illuminated the dimly lit space, casting subtle shadows on the walls. It was my third night babysitting for the Hendersons, and 8-year-old Tommy was already fast asleep upstairs. I enjoyed these quiet evening hours when the house seemed to breathe with its own gentle rhythm. The occasional creak of wooden floors and the whisper of wind through the trees outside had become familiar companions during my stays here. The modern smart home system kept the temperature perfectly regulated, though I sometimes felt a peculiar chill that seemed to come from nowhere in particular. My attention drifted to the notification sound from my laptop. Tommy had left his tablet downstairs, and I noticed it was still connected to the home's Wi-Fi network. A small icon indicated active internet usage. Curious, I checked the parental control dashboard Mrs. Henderson had given me access to. Tommy's tablet showed ongoing activity in what appeared to be a chat application. My heart beat a little faster, though not from fear, more from concern. I knew Tommy should have been asleep for hours now. The tablet screen showed he was messaging someone called Midnight Friend. The username struck me as odd for a child's gaming companion. Rising from my chair, I made my way upstairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I approached Tommy's room. The door was slightly ajar, exactly as I'd left it earlier. Inside, Tommy was sound asleep, his chest rising and falling steadily beneath his space-themed comforter. Back downstairs, I studied the chat logs more carefully. The conversation seemed innocent enough at first, discussions about favorite games and school, but as I scrolled through, subtle patterns emerged that made my skin prickle. Midnight Friend asked very specific questions about Tommy's daily routine, his parents' schedules, and our location. A notification popped up. "Is Tommy asleep yet?" Midnight Friend wrote. "I'd love to come over and play some games with him." My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered how to respond. The smart doorbell chimed softly, its screen showing an empty front porch. Just the rain, I told myself, though my hands had grown cold. Another message appeared. "I'm closer than you think. Let's surprise Tommy together." The house's automated systems hummed quietly around me. A security alert flashed on my phone. Motion detected in the backyard. The camera feed showed only darkness and rain, but something about the way the bushes moved seemed wrong, too deliberate. I activated the home's security system, watching as green confirmation lights blinked across various sensors. The tablet chimed again. "Why did you do that?" Midnight Friend asked. "I just want to play. Don't you trust me?" The smart lights in the kitchen flickered briefly. A notification indicated someone was attempting to access the home's Wi-Fi network. Each failed attempt made my throat tighter, though I maintained my composure. I needed to think clearly. I began systematically disconnecting devices from the network, starting with Tommy's tablet. The house grew quieter as each smart device went dark. Soon, only my phone and laptop remained connected, both running on cellular data. A soft thud emanated from upstairs, followed by the gentle creak of floorboards. My breath caught in my throat as I pulled up the indoor security camera feed. Tommy was still sleeping peacefully, but something moved in the hallway. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. The laptop screen flickered, displaying a new message. "You can't keep me out forever. I know all the passwords. Tommy shared them with me weeks ago." Rain continued its gentle symphony against the windows as I called the police, my voice steady despite the circumstances. They assured me units were already en route, having detected the suspicious network activity through the home's advanced security protocols. In the days that followed, cybersecurity experts would trace Midnight Friend's digital footprints, revealing an elaborate scheme targeting smart homes in the area. They never found the person behind the username, though their digital presence vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Tommy's parents upgraded their security systems and changed all their passwords. Tommy received new guidelines about online friendships and safety. Life returned to normal, or something close to it. But on quiet nights when I'm babysitting, I still find myself watching the security feeds more closely than before. Sometimes, when the rain falls just right and the house grows still, I wonder if Midnight Friend is still out there, waiting for another opportunity to play their deadly game. The modern world has made our homes smarter, more connected, more convenient. But as I learned that night, it has also created new shadows for dangers to hide in, new spaces where the line between friend and stranger blurs like rain on a window pane. And sometimes, the most dangerous games are the ones we don't even know we're playing until it's almost too late. Story 10. The gentle patter of rain against canvas filled my consciousness as I lay in the darkened tent, trying to find sleep. Mike and Sarah had dozed off hours ago, their steady breathing mixing with the natural symphony of the forest night. We had chosen this remote camping spot for its pristine beauty and isolation, though now that very isolation weighed heavily on my mind. Earlier that day, we'd hiked deep into the old-growth forest, following a barely visible trail that wound between towering pines and ancient oaks. The air had been crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of pine needles and late summer wildflowers. Our laughter echoed through the trees as we shared stories and dreams, three friends seeking refuge from our busy lives in nature's embrace. The first sign that something was amiss came during sunset. As we gathered wood for our campfire, I noticed unusual tire tracks cutting through the underbrush, fresh enough that recent rain hadn't washed them away. In such a remote location, any human presence felt out of place. I mentioned it to Mike, but he suggested it was probably just Forest Service vehicles doing their rounds. The fire's warmth kept us comfortable as darkness settled in, stars peeking through gaps in the canopy above. We roasted marshmallows and shared ghost stories, our voices hushed in deference to the vast wilderness surrounding us. A cool breeze carried the sweet smoke away, along with our concerns about the mysterious tracks. That was before we heard the first engine. It was distant at first, a low rumble that could have been thunder. But the sound grew closer, then cut off abruptly. Sarah suggested we douse the fire, an instinct I now know was right. We sat in darkness, listening to the forest's nighttime chorus of crickets and distant owls. Voices carried on the wind, too far to make out words, but close enough to send chills down my spine. They didn't sound like casual hikers or rangers. The tone was urgent, commanding, professional. Through gaps in the trees, I caught glimpses of flashlight beams sweeping the forest floor, methodical and searching. Now, hours later, I lay awake in our tent, every sense heightened. The rain had begun shortly after we'd retreated to our shelter, its gentle rhythm almost managing to lull me into a false sense of security. Almost. Through the constant patter, other sounds reached my ears. Twigs snapping under careful footsteps, hushed voices conferring in the distance, the metallic click of what could only be weapons being checked. Sarah stirred beside me, her hand finding mine in the darkness. She squeezed gently, letting me know she was awake too. Mike remained still, but his breathing had changed. We were all alert, all aware of the danger surrounding us, yet frozen in indecision. A beam of light passed over our tent, turning the olive fabric momentarily translucent. My heart seemed to pause between beats as shadows moved past. The voices grew closer, words becoming clear despite their whispered delivery. Grid search complete on sectors 7 and 8. No sign of interference with the operation. Keep looking. We can't risk anyone stumbling onto the lab. The lab. Two simple words that explained everything. The isolation, the armed men, the professional demeanor. We had unknowingly camped on the outskirts of something far more dangerous than bears or mountain lions. The rain continued its gentle descent, now feeling more like nature's blessing than an inconvenience. It masked any small sounds we might make, provided cover for our breathing, and most importantly, would hide our tracks when we moved. We waited, measuring time by heartbeats and raindrops. The searchers moved on, their lights becoming distant pinpricks before disappearing entirely. Still, we remained motionless, knowing that in situations like this, patience meant survival. Dawn approached with agonizing slowness. The rain eased to a gentle mist, and the first birds began their morning songs. Only then did we dare to move, packing our gear in complete silence. Every rustle of fabric felt thunderous, every zip of a bag like a siren announcing our presence. The forest looked different in the gray pre-dawn light. Shadows seemed deeper, trees more menacing. Even the morning mist, beautiful under normal circumstances, now felt like a veil hiding unknown threats. We moved carefully, choosing each step to avoid twigs that might snap beneath our feet. Our path back to civilization required crossing a small stream. The recent rain had swollen it slightly, making the crossing more treacherous. But the running water would hide our scent and tracks from any dogs they might have. We waded through carefully, the cold water a shock that kept us alert and focused. A distant engine sound froze us in place. Through the trees, a vehicle moved along what must have been a hidden access road. We pressed ourselves against the wet bark of a massive pine, barely daring to breathe. The vehicle passed without slowing, but its presence confirmed our fears. We weren't yet safe. The morning grew brighter as we continued our careful retreat. Every shadow could hide a sentry. Every rustle of leaves could signal approach. The weight of our camping gear felt insignificant compared to the burden of silence we carried. When we finally reached the main trail, marked by actual blazes on trees, relief flooded through me. But we didn't celebrate, didn't speak, didn't even change our careful pace. Experience gained through fear told us that assumption of safety could be fatal. Hours later, when our car came into view in the small parking area, I felt tears welling in my eyes. Only after we'd driven several miles, the forest receding in our rearview mirror, did Sarah break the silence. Should we report it? Mike shook his head slowly. Report what? We saw lights and heard voices. We made assumptions, nothing more. I remained quiet, hands steady on the steering wheel, but my mind wandered back to that night. To the professional voices, the methodical search, the hidden lab in the wilderness. Sometimes the wisest choice is to keep moving forward, to let the rain wash away tracks and memories alike. Yet on quiet nights, when rain taps against my window, I find myself thinking about that forest, about what might still be happening in its depths, hidden from the world by layers of trees and silence. And I wonder if somewhere in that vast wilderness, other unsuspecting hikers are learning the same lesson we did, that some threats whisper rather than roar, and some mysteries are better left unexplored. Story 11. The gentle purr of my car engine had been my only companion for hours as I drove through the midnight darkness. The headlights carved a path through the thick fog that rolled across the empty highway, creating an ethereal tunnel of soft, diffused light. I found myself oddly at peace with the solitude, watching the white lines of the road slip past like a hypnotic meditation. The first sign something was wrong came as a subtle change in the engine's rhythm. A slight hesitation, barely noticeable at first, like a singer missing a single beat in a familiar song. I listened more intently, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel as I decreased my speed. The dashboard lights glowed with their usual reassuring amber, but something felt different. The engine's whisper grew more insistent, transforming into a quiet but persistent knocking. Relief flooded through me as I spotted the illuminated sign of a rest area ahead. The soft glow of overhead lights promised safety and shelter from the encompassing darkness. I guided my failing vehicle into the empty parking lot, the tires crunching softly on the weathered asphalt. As I turned off the engine, silence settled around me like a heavy blanket. The fog had followed me into the rest area, wrapping the few scattered lampposts in gauzy halos. Their light created pools of warmth in the darkness, but somehow made the shadows between them seem deeper, more substantial. The air inside the car grew thick with the lingering warmth of the heater and the faint scent of my leather seats. I reached for my phone, its screen casting a gentle blue glow across my face. No signal. Of course, I had passed the last cell tower miles ago, watching the bars fade one by one until only the empty icon remained. The time displayed 2:47 a.m., the numbers seeming to float in the darkness. A movement caught my eye, a shadow passing through one of the light pools. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, waiting. Nothing. Just the fog shifting in the night air, playing tricks with my tired eyes. I needed to check the engine, but the thought of stepping out into that ethereal landscape made my skin prickle with apprehension. The door opened with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine trees. My footsteps echoed quietly as I made my way to the front of the car, each sound seeming to ripple out into the darkness like stones dropped in a still pond. The hood was still warm under my fingers as I lifted it. Steam rose in delicate tendrils, dancing with the fog before disappearing into the night. As I leaned in to examine the engine, a sound reached my ears. Footsteps, soft and measured, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, my heart keeping time with the steady approach of those phantom steps. Through the fog, I could make out a tall figure moving between the pools of light. Each time it passed through the illumination, its outline seemed to shift and change, as if the fog itself was trying to give it form. My feet carried me backward without conscious thought, each step carefully placed to avoid making a sound. The figure continued its measured advance, neither speeding up nor slowing down. I could feel the cold metal of my car against my back, the handle pressing into my spine. The door opened silently this time, or perhaps my pulse was too loud in my ears to hear it. I slipped inside, my trembling fingers finding the lock button. The solid thunk of the mechanisms engaging provided little comfort as I watched the figure draw nearer through the fog-streaked windshield. It passed through another pool of light, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been a face, or perhaps just another trick of the shifting fog. The knocking in my engine had stopped, replaced by the soft ticking of cooling metal and my own shallow breathing. I pressed the key into the ignition, whispering a quiet prayer to whatever might be listening. The engine caught immediately, purring as smoothly as if nothing had ever been wrong. My headlights cut through the fog, but the figure had vanished, leaving only empty pools of light and shifting shadows. As I pulled away from the rest area, my hands steady on the wheel despite my racing heart, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror. The fog was already hiding the rest area from view, but for a moment, I thought I saw something standing in the road, watching my retreat. The image stayed with me as I drove through the remainder of the night. The engine's gentle purr, now a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone in the darkness. Some nights, when I'm driving late and the fog rolls in, I think about that figure in the rest area. I wonder if it's still there, walking its measured path between pools of light, waiting for another traveler to stop. And sometimes, when I pass a rest area in the dark hours before dawn, I swear I can see something moving in the fog, keeping pace with my car until the next pool of light reveals only empty shadows. The highway stretches on, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the night, and I've learned to keep driving, no matter how tired I become. Because sometimes the real terror isn't in what pursues us, but in the quiet moments when we choose to stop and face what waits in the darkness. Story 12. The gentle patter of rain against weathered wood created a soothing rhythm as I stood before the Victorian mansion, my camera hanging heavy around my neck. The late afternoon light filtered through dense clouds, casting soft shadows across the ornate facade. My fellow urban explorers, Sarah and Marcus, stood beside me, their breath visible in the cool autumn air. "Remember what we agreed upon," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "We document everything, but we respect the space." The old house seemed to acknowledge our presence, creaking softly in the wind. The front door opened with surprising ease, its ancient hinges whispering rather than screaming. The foyer welcomed us with the scent of old books and cedar, a pleasant mustiness that spoke of countless memories preserved within these walls. Our footsteps fell softly on the thick carpet, which had somehow maintained its deep burgundy color despite years of abandonment. Sarah moved toward the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the smooth mahogany banister. "The craftsmanship here is remarkable," she murmured, her voice barely disturbing the peaceful atmosphere. Marcus was already documenting the intricate crown molding with his camera, the quiet click of his shutter becoming part of the house's gentle symphony. In the parlor, time seemed to move differently. Dust motes danced in the rays of light that managed to pierce through the lace curtains, creating ethereal patterns in the air. A grand piano stood in the corner, its keys a perfect gradient of ivory and shadow. As I approached it, a single note rang out, clear and pure, though none of us had touched it. "Did you hear that?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but curious. Sarah nodded, her expression one of wonder rather than fear. The sound seemed to invite us deeper into the house's embrace. The library held thousands of books, their leather spines creating a tapestry of muted colors along the walls. As we explored, I noticed something peculiar. The books seemed to be arranged not by author or title, but in intricate patterns that caught the eye and held it. Some formations appeared to form letters or symbols when viewed from certain angles. The temperature dropped gradually as we ascended to the second floor, though not unpleasantly so. It felt more like stepping into a cool garden on a summer evening. The wallpaper here told stories in its patterns, flowers that seemed to bloom and fade as we passed, vines that appeared to shift and grow in our peripheral vision. In what must have been the master bedroom, we found a mirror that reflected more than it should. Our reflections seemed to move a fraction of a second after we did, and sometimes I caught glimpses of other figures in the background, shadowy forms that moved with grace and purpose, never threatening, merely observing. "Look at this," Sarah called softly from the corner. A writing desk held an open journal, its pages filled with elegant script. The ink appeared fresh, though that should have been impossible. As we watched, words began forming on the blank page before us. "Welcome, gentle visitors. Few see the beauty in what others fear. The writing faded slowly, like morning mist dissipating in sunlight. We stood in comfortable silence, understanding that we were guests in a place where the ordinary rules of reality held little sway. The attic revealed itself to be a treasure trove of memories. Trunks filled with Victorian-era clothing released the scent of lavender when opened. Photographs in silver frames showed faces that smiled knowingly at us. Their eyes holding secrets they seemed willing to share if we only knew how to ask. As the day's light began to fade, we made our way back downstairs. The house's energy had changed subtly, not darker, but deeper, more intimate. The shadows had grown longer, but they felt protective rather than threatening. Each room we passed through seemed to bid us farewell in its own way. A warm breeze here, a musical chime there, the subtle creak of floorboards like footsteps following our path. In the foyer, we found our equipment bags had been neatly arranged by the door, though we had left them scattered throughout the house. A small wooden box sat atop my bag, its surface carved with intricate geometric patterns. Inside, we found 3 antique keys, each one unique and beautifully crafted. The front door opened for us as smoothly as it had when we entered. As we stepped outside, the rain had stopped, and the setting sun painted the clouds in soft shades of purple and gold. The keys in our pockets felt warm to the touch, a gentle reminder that we had been chosen as much as we had chosen to explore this place. Looking back at the mansion, I saw movement behind one of the upper windows, perhaps a curtain stirring in the breeze, perhaps something more. The house had shared its secrets with us, but not all of them. Some mysteries, I realized, are meant to be experienced rather than solved. That night, as I reviewed our photographs, I noticed something remarkable. In each image, there were subtle details we hadn't seen during our visit. A figure in Victorian dress disappearing around a corner, handprints of light on the walls, faces in the window reflections smiling benevolently. Yet none of these discoveries filled me with dread. Instead, they brought a sense of peace, an understanding that some places exist in the space between reality and dreams. The house had not been haunted in the way we expected. It was alive with memories, with stories, with the gentle accumulation of countless lives lived within its walls. As I drifted off to sleep, I could still hear the soft whisper of its floorboards, the distant melody of that untouched piano, and I knew we would return, not as investigators of the supernatural, but as guests in a place where magic still dwells in the quiet corners of the world. The keys we received that day remain warm to the touch, a constant reminder that some doors, once opened, never truly close, and perhaps they're not meant to. In the end, we didn't discover a haunted house. We found a house that was very much alive, one that chose to share its magic with those who approached with respect and wonder rather than fear. Story 13. The night shift always begins the same way. I unlock the heavy glass doors, step into the vast atrium, and listen to my footsteps echo across the polished marble floor. Tonight, the familiar routine feels different. Perhaps it's the way the moonlight filters through the skylight, casting strange shadows that seem to dance between the silent storefronts. I've walked these corridors for 3 years now, but the mall never feels quite empty. During the day, it's a bustling marketplace filled with the chatter of shoppers and the soft music from overhead speakers. At night, it transforms into something else entirely, a cathedral of commerce holding its breath until morning. The security office is my sanctuary, a small room lined with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the building. I settle into my chair, the leather creaking softly as I lean back. The screens paint my face in a pale blue glow. Everything appears normal. Mannequins standing sentinel in darkened windows, escalators frozen in their endless climb, potted plants casting long shadows across the walkways. My first round begins at midnight. The flashlight beam sweeps across closed shutters and darkened displays as I make my way through the ground floor. The fountain in the central court continues its gentle cascade, the water's whisper a constant companion in the silence. I pause there sometimes, watching the coins shimmer at the bottom like fallen stars. Tonight, something catches my eye, a reflection in a storefront window that doesn't quite match what should be there. I turn slowly, but see only empty space. The hair on the back of my neck rises slightly. Security training teaches us to trust our instincts, but it also teaches us not to jump at shadows. I continue my patrol, footsteps measured and deliberate. The food court lies dark and still, chairs neatly stacked on tables. A wrapper skitters across the floor, pushed by the air conditioning's gentle breath. I make a mental note to speak with the cleaning crew about being more thorough. The soft crackle of my radio breaks the silence. Static at first, then nothing. Probably interference from the building's electrical systems. Still, I key the mic. Bass, radio check. No response. Another crackle, this time with what might be a voice buried in the white noise. I adjust the volume, straining to hear. Movement catches my eye, a shadow passing between columns near the north entrance. My hand instinctively moves to the radio again, but I pause. Years of experience have taught me to observe first, react second. The shadow resolves into a figure, then another. They move with purpose, staying close to the walls. I step back into an alcove, becoming part of the darkness. The figures, I count 3 now, are carrying something. The metallic glint of weapons sends ice through my veins, but years of training keep my breathing steady. They haven't seen me yet. My mind races through protocols and procedures. The silent alarm button on my belt would bring police within minutes, but something tells me to wait, to watch, to understand. These aren't simple burglars. Their movements are too coordinated, too professional. I ease my way back toward the security office, using the shadows as cover. The cameras will give me a better view of their movements, help me understand their purpose. The leather chair never felt more welcoming as I sink into it, eyes scanning the monitors. They're moving toward the central court, but their pattern seems odd. Not heading for any of the high-value targets, no jewelry stores or electronics outlets. Instead, they're methodically checking service corridors and maintenance access points. A thought forms slowly. They're not here to steal. They're looking for something specific, or someone. The realization brings with it a strange calm. This is my domain, my sanctuary. I know every corner, every shadow, every hiding place. They are visitors here, no matter their intentions. I watch them split up, maintaining radio contact with hand signals. Professional, military trained perhaps. But they don't know what I know, that the mall's architecture is designed to disorient, to guide shoppers past as many storefronts as possible. At night, this labyrinthine quality becomes a weapon. With deliberate movements, I begin switching off sections of emergency lighting, creating pools of darkness where there should be light. On the monitors, I see them react, adjusting their patterns. They're cautious now, uncertain. Good. The ventilation system can be controlled from here too. I adjust the fans, creating subtle air currents that carry sounds in unexpected directions. A whisper of movement from the north echoes near the south entrance. They're starting to bunch up, their earlier confidence eroding. I key the mic one more time, but instead of speaking into it, I place it near the speaker of my phone. The soft, tinkling notes of the mall's daytime music playlist emerge, distorted by static, playing from random speakers throughout the building. On the monitors, I see them freeze, weapons raised at shadows. Time becomes fluid as I orchestrate my symphony of uncertainty. They're moving faster now, less cautious, making mistakes. One of them stumbles into a display, the crash echoing through empty corridors. I allow myself a small smile. A new sound enters the composition, distant sirens. Not from my silent alarm, which remains untouched. Someone else must have seen something, called it in. The figures on my screens hear it too. Their movements become hurried, desperate. They're retreating now, but not toward their entrance point. They're being herded, though they don't realize it, toward the loading docks. Metal shutters conceal those exits with the push of a button. I wait, finger hovering over the control. The first figure rushes through the doorway, then the second. I count heartbeats, waiting for the third. There. My finger descends, and the shutters crash down with finality. Through the cameras, I watch them realize their mistake too late. Minutes later, red and blue lights flash across the marble floors. Officers move through the building with practiced efficiency, weapons ready. I meet them at the loading dock, hand over the security footage, answer their questions. Professional, concise, detached. Later, after the questions are answered and the paperwork filed, I return to my rounds. The fountain continues its endless song, coins glittering below the surface. Display windows reflect only what they should. My footsteps echo across the marble floors. But something has changed. The mall feels different now, as if it has awakened to its own potential. The shadows between the columns seem deeper, more aware. Perhaps it has always been this way, and I'm only now attuned to it. Or perhaps the building has recognized in me a kindred spirit, a guardian of liminal spaces, keeper of the threshold between day and night. I finish my patrol and return to the security office. The monitors glow their reassuring blue. Tomorrow, shoppers will flood these halls again, unaware of the night's events. But I'll know, and so will the mall. The night shift always ends the same way. I lock the heavy glass doors, step out into the growing dawn, and listen to my footsteps fade into silence. But now, just before I turn away, I catch a reflection in the glass, the building settling into its daily disguise, holding our shared secrets in its quiet heart. Story 14. The rain fell softly against the weathered metal roof of the abandoned industrial complex, creating a gentle rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire structure. I stood at the entrance, my flashlight beam cutting through the evening mist, watching droplets trace patterns down the grimy windows. The scent of wet concrete and rusted metal filled my nostrils, strangely comforting in its industrial familiarity. I had always been drawn to forgotten places, seeking out the stories written in their decay. This particular complex had caught my attention during my evening walks, a sprawling testament to bygone industry, its skeletal framework reaching toward the clouded sky. The security fence had long since surrendered to nature, creating an inviting gap that seemed to beckon explorers like myself. The main entrance door yielded with a soft groan, its hinges protesting years of disuse. The sound echoed through the cavernous space before being absorbed by the darkness. My footsteps whispered against the concrete floor, accompanied by the gentle patter of rain finding its way through gaps in the roof. Water pooled in shallow depressions, creating mirror-like surfaces that reflected my light in mysterious patterns. As I moved deeper into the building, I noticed something peculiar about the dust patterns on the floor. While most areas bore the expected thick layer of undisturbed grime, certain paths appeared cleaner, as if recently traveled. My curiosity, always my closest companion on these solitary adventures, pulled me forward along these subtle trails. The air grew heavier as I approached what appeared to be an old processing area. Massive machinery loomed in the shadows, their shapes transformed by time and darkness into abstract sculptures. A faint chemical smell, out of place in this abandoned space, tickled my nose. It was subtle but distinct, something sharp and artificial beneath the expected musty decay. My light caught something reflective in a corner, small plastic bags scattered near a modern-looking table that stood in stark contrast to its deteriorating surroundings. The table's surface bore trace amounts of white powder, and nearby, a digital scale lay partially hidden beneath some old newspapers. My heart maintained its steady rhythm, but my mind raced with understanding. This forgotten space had found new purpose in the hands of those who preferred to operate in shadows. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop marking time like a liquid metronome. The sound seemed to grow louder as I stood there, contemplating my discovery. A gentle breeze whispered through broken windows, carrying with it the sweet petrichor of rain-soaked earth. The building creaked and settled around me, its metal bones contracting in the cooling night air. Moving further into the complex, I found more evidence of current occupation. Fresh tire tracks in the dust, modern padlocks on certain doors, small generators tucked away in corners. Each discovery added another layer to the story unfolding before me. The contrast between decay and these signs of life created an unsettling harmony. In what must have once been an office area, I found a room that seemed to serve as some kind of monitoring station. Old security cameras, long dead, had been replaced with newer models. Their red recording lights blinked slowly in the darkness like mechanical heartbeats. On a desk beneath them, a logbook lay open, its pages filled with times and cryptic numbers. The rain intensified outside, its rhythm changing from gentle tapping to a more insistent drum against the metal roof. Water began to flow more freely through the ceiling gaps, creating small waterfalls that caught and scattered my light. The sound provided perfect cover for my movement through the space, though I found myself wondering if it might also mask the approach of others. In a far corner of the complex, I discovered what appeared to be a loading dock, recently cleared of debris. Fresh tire tracks led to and from this area, disappearing into the rainy night beyond. Nearby, I found discarded coffee cups and food wrappers, evidence of people spending long hours waiting for what or whom I could only imagine. Time seemed to flow differently in this place, measured only by the steady drum of rain and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. I had been here for hours, or perhaps minutes. The darkness and constant sound made it difficult to tell. My flashlight beam caught movement in the distance, but it was only my own reflection in a rain-streaked window, distorted and mysterious. As I made my way back toward the entrance, I noticed something I had missed before. Hidden behind a partially collapsed wall, a small office contained a modern laptop, its screen casting a pale blue glow into the darkness. The screen displayed a shipping manifest, lists of numbers and dates scrolling endlessly. I carefully memorized what I could see, knowing this information might prove important later. The rain had begun to ease as I approached the exit, returning to its earlier gentle pattern. My flashlight caught something new, fresh footprints in the dust, pointing inward, their edges still sharp and clear. They hadn't been there when I entered. The realization came with neither panic nor fear, just a calm understanding that it was time to leave. I slipped out through the same gap in the fence that had granted me entrance, the wet metal cold against my hand. Behind me, the complex loomed silent and dark, its secrets now shared with an uninvited witness. The rain continued its gentle percussion, washing away any trace of my presence. In the days that followed, I often thought about that night, about the strange dual nature of that decaying place, its surface abandoned and forgotten, while beneath that facade, a hidden pulse of activity thrived. Sometimes, when the rain falls at night, I find myself drawn to my window, watching water trace patterns in the darkness, remembering the secrets whispered by rusted metal and fallen concrete. I never returned to the industrial complex, but I know my discovery there changed something fundamental in the rhythm of that place. Perhaps my presence was noted in logbooks or captured by those blinking red eyes. Perhaps the operation simply continued, undisturbed by my brief intrusion into its world. But in my mind, that night exists in perfect clarity. A moment when the boundary between abandonment and purpose, between past and present, became as fluid as the rain that fell from the darkened sky. The memory of that night visits me still, carried on the scent of rain and rusty metal, in the sound of water drumming on distant roofs, in the play of shadows through broken windows. It reminds me that beneath the surface of forgotten places, new stories are always waiting to be discovered by those willing to look closer, to listen more carefully, to step through the gaps in fences that separate the world we know from the one that exists in shadow. Story 15. The soft patter of rain against leaves created a gentle rhythm above our heads as Sarah and I made our way deeper into the ancient forest. Our footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet of pine needles, and the morning mist clung to our clothes like a protective shroud. The towering trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their branches weaving together to form a natural canopy that filtered the early light into an ethereal green glow. "We should rest here for a moment," I whispered to Sarah, gesturing toward a fallen log covered in velvet moss. She nodded silently, her eyes scanning the surrounding forest with practiced caution. We had been walking for hours, our muscles aching from the constant movement, but we couldn't afford to stop for long. The gentle sound of water dropping from leaf to leaf almost made me forget why we were here. The events that led us to this moment seemed surreal now, like a dream that refuses to fade upon waking. We had stumbled upon something we weren't meant to see, a hidden clearing, a midnight transaction, hushed voices and metallic gleams in the darkness. Now we were being pursued by shadows that moved with purpose through these ancient woods. I closed my eyes and focused on my other senses, something my grandmother had taught me long ago. The forest spoke in whispers, the subtle creaking of branches, the distant call of a morning bird, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. But beneath these natural sounds, something felt off. The forest's rhythm had changed, becoming slightly discordant, like an orchestra missing a single instrument. Sarah touched my arm gently, and I opened my eyes to meet her concerned gaze. She didn't need to speak. I could read the message in her expression. We weren't alone anymore. The rain continued its soft percussion on the canopy above, but now it seemed to mask other sounds, footsteps that didn't quite match the forest's natural cadence. We rose slowly, our movements deliberate and quiet. The mist had thickened, transforming the trees into looming sentinels that seemed to watch our every move. The moisture in the air carried scents more clearly: pine, wet earth, decomposing leaves, and something else. Something artificial. Aftershave, perhaps, or the leather of new boots. Our pursuers were drawing closer, but they didn't know these woods like we did. Sarah and I had grown up here, spent countless childhood days exploring every hollow and ridge. The forest had been our playground, our sanctuary, and now it would be our protector. We moved with practiced ease, our feet finding natural paths between the trees that wouldn't leave obvious signs of our passage. The rain began to fall more heavily, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The increased rainfall would make tracking more difficult, and the sound would cover our movement. Nature itself seemed to be conspiring to help us. We made our way toward an area where the ground dropped away suddenly, creating a natural hollow beneath the twisted roots of an ancient oak tree. The space was tight but dry, and as we settled into it, I was struck by how this moment felt both terrifying and peaceful. The rain created a curtain of water that partially obscured the entrance to our hiding place, and the roots around us felt like protective arms. Sarah pressed close to me, her breathing steady and controlled. Above us, we could hear movement, careful footsteps trying to be silent, but betrayed by the occasional snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. Time seemed to flow differently in our natural shelter. Minutes stretched into hours as we remained perfectly still, becoming part of the forest itself. The rain eventually began to ease, and the forest sounds gradually returned to their normal patterns. Birds resumed their conversations, and small animals emerged from their own hiding places to continue their daily routines. When we finally emerged from our shelter, the forest felt different. The morning mist had cleared, replaced by afternoon sunlight that created dappled patterns on the forest floor. There were signs of our pursuers' passage: broken branches, disturbed earth, cigarette butts that seemed obscene in this natural setting. But they had moved on, following false trails that led away from our position. Sarah and I moved carefully through the transformed landscape, our steps lighter now, our hearts beating in rhythm with the forest's pulse. The danger wasn't over, but we had learned something valuable. In this ancient place of towering trees and hidden hollows, nature itself had become our ally, protecting us in ways we hadn't expected. As we made our way toward safer ground, I reflected on how this forest, which some might find menacing, had revealed itself to be a guardian rather than a source of terror. The real terror lay not in the darkness between the trees or the mysterious sounds of the woods, but in the human shadows that had pursued us. The forest had simply been the stage upon which this drama played out, and in the end, it had chosen its side. The sun was beginning to set when we finally reached the edge of the woods. The trees seemed to whisper goodbye as we emerged, their leaves rustling in a sudden breeze. Sarah squeezed my hand, and we shared a knowing look. We had survived not by conquering the forest's terror, but by becoming part of its mystery. The experience had changed us in ways we couldn't yet understand, leaving us with a deeper appreciation for the quiet power of these ancient woods. Behind us, the forest kept its secrets, the darkness between the trees holding countless untold stories. As we walked away, I knew we would carry this experience with us forever, not as a nightmare to be forgotten, but as a reminder of the strange and powerful alliance we had found in a place where terror and beauty danced together in the shadows of ancient trees. Story 16. I never thought I would find peace in remembering that night in the wilderness. Yet here I am, years later, finding an odd sort of tranquility in recalling how the moonlight painted silver brushstrokes across the forest floor. The memory comes to me now like a distant dream, softened by time, but still vivid in its details. Our group had been hiking for 3 days, following ancient trails through dense forest. The air carried the sweet scent of pine needles and wild mint, while gentle breezes whispered through the canopy above. We were 5 friends who had traveled these paths before, but never this deep into the wilderness. The trouble began so quietly that at first it felt like part of the forest's natural rhythm. I was tending to our campfire, watching the flames dance and listening to the wood crack softly. The others were settling into their evening routines, Morgan preparing dinner, Alex checking our supplies, and the twins, Sarah and James, setting up the last tent. A branch snapped in the darkness beyond our camp. Nature makes such sounds constantly, but something about this one made the hair on my neck rise. I looked up to find Morgan already alert, her hands frozen mid-motion over the cooking pot. Our eyes met across the flames, and I saw my own unease reflected in her gaze. The forest had gone quiet. The night birds had ceased their songs, and even the insects seemed to hold their breath. In that stillness, we heard it, the subtle crunch of boots on dried leaves, moving with deliberate slowness. Multiple sets of footsteps, trying not to be heard. I reached for the dimmer on our solar lantern, gradually lowering its brightness. No sudden movements. No cause for alarm. Perhaps they were just fellow hikers, I told myself, though my heart knew better. Fellow hikers would have called out by now. The twins had noticed too. They moved with remarkable silence, slipping into the shadows of the larger trees. Alex remained by the supply bags, his hand casually reaching for something inside. We had all grown up in these forests. We knew how to move quietly, how to blend with the shadows. The moonlight revealed them gradually, dark figures moving between trees, carrying long objects that could only be rifles. 5 of them spread out in a loose semicircle around our camp. They hadn't seen us scatter yet. their attention focused on our apparently occupied campsite. I felt an odd sense of calm settle over me. The fear was there, but distant, like watching waves through deep water. Every sound became crystal clear. The soft pop of embers, the whisper of wind through leaves, the muffled footsteps drawing closer. Morgan had already disappeared into the underbrush, leaving the pot gently simmering. A clever touch, I thought. Make them believe we were still going about our evening routine, unaware of their presence. The twins had positioned themselves behind different trees, and I could barely discern their outlines in the darkness. Time seemed to flow like honey, thick and slow. I watched through half-closed eyes as the intruders approached our fire. They moved with military precision, weapons ready, expecting to find us there. Instead, they found empty camp chairs and a meal cooking itself. Their confusion was evident in their postures, in the way they looked at each other. That moment of uncertainty was all we needed. Alex let out our group's old hunting whistle. 3 short notes that sounded exactly like a local night bird. To anyone else, it would have seemed natural. To us, it was a signal. We moved as one, but not to attack. We'd spent countless hours in these woods, knew every trail and hidden path. While they were still processing their empty find, we were already sliding through the darkness, using every skill we'd learned since childhood to move without sound. The forest itself seemed to aid our escape, branches bending silently, leaves hushing our footsteps. We could hear them behind us, their frustrated voices carrying through the trees as they realized their quarry had slipped away. But we were already ghosts, flowing like water through familiar paths, our movements guided by moonlight and memory. Hours passed as we moved through the night, using every trick we knew to obscure our trail. We crossed streams, backtracked, split up, and rejoined at predetermined points. The moon watched our progress, casting just enough light to navigate by, while the wind covered any sounds we might have made. By dawn, we had put miles between us and our abandoned camp. We emerged from the forest near a ranger station, tired but unharmed. The authorities would later tell us that they'd been tracking a group of armed smugglers in the area. We had unknowingly camped along their route. But what stays with me most isn't the danger or the escape. It's the perfect synchronization of 5 people moving through darkness, trusting each other completely. The way moonlight filtered through leaves to guide our steps, the gentle percussion of nighttime forest sounds masking our movement, the dance of shadows that kept us safe. Now, years later, I sometimes find myself sitting quietly in the evening, listening to the wind. And in those moments, I remember how the forest protected us, how we flowed like shadows through the trees. There's a strange beauty in that memory, a reminder that even in moments of danger, there can be grace. That sometimes survival itself is an art form, as delicate and precise as a dance in the moonlight. The experience changed us, certainly, but not in the way you might expect. We still return to the forests, still find peace in the wilderness. Only now, when darkness falls and the night birds begin their songs, we share knowing smiles. Because we understand something that few others do, that sometimes the most profound moments of peace can be found in the midst of chaos, and that true strength often lies not in confrontation, but in knowing when to dance with the shadows. Story 17. The gentle patter of rain against my bedroom window had been lulling me into a peaceful state all evening. I lay in bed, listening to the rhythmic sound while watching shadows dance across my ceiling, cast by the swaying branches outside. The old house creaked softly, its timber frame settling in the cool night air. These familiar sounds had become my nightly lullaby since moving into the Victorian residence 6 months ago. My consciousness drifted between wakefulness and sleep when a different sound caught my attention. At first, it was barely perceptible, a soft scraping noise from somewhere downstairs. In my drowsy state, I dismissed it as another of the house's many nocturnal voices, The floorboards often whispered and moaned as temperatures dropped, and the radiators occasionally clicked and hummed. But then I heard it again. This time, the sound was more distinct, a gentle sliding like wood against wood. My eyes opened fully, and I found myself listening with heightened awareness. The rain continued its steady drumming, but beneath it, these new sounds seemed to be growing more frequent. I sat up slowly, careful not to let my bed springs creak. The dim glow of moonlight filtered through my gauzy curtains, painting everything in soft shades of silver and gray. My bedroom door stood slightly ajar, just as I'd left it, a sliver of darkness visible through the gap. The sound came again, and this time I could place it more precisely. The antique writing desk in my study, the one with the stubborn drawers that always stuck slightly. I knew that particular sound intimately from my daily struggles with it, but I hadn't left my bed in hours. My heart began to beat a little faster, though not from fear, rather from a strange sort of curiosity. The quality of the sounds suggested someone taking great care to be quiet, moving with deliberate slowness. A common burglar would likely be more rushed, more careless. This methodical approach spoke of something else entirely. Rising from my bed, I slipped my feet into the soft wool slippers beside it. The wooden floor felt solid beneath me, grounding me in reality as my mind wandered through various possibilities. I moved toward my bedroom door with measured steps, each one carefully placed to avoid the boards I knew would protest under my weight. The hallway outside was a tunnel of shadows, broken only by the faint illumination from my bedroom window. As I stood in the doorway, I noticed something odd about the darkness at the far end, where the stairs descended to the first floor. It seemed somehow different, thicker, more substantial than usual. The air felt heavier too, carrying an unfamiliar scent that I couldn't quite identify, something old, like aged paper and leather-bound books. I moved forward, trailing my fingers along the wallpaper to maintain my orientation. The house felt different at this hour, as if the familiar spaces had shifted slightly, creating a subtly altered geography. The rain's percussion provided a steady backdrop to my careful progression, masking any small sounds I might have made. Reaching the top of the stairs, I paused. The strange sounds had ceased, but the silence that replaced them felt alive with anticipation. Looking down into the darkness below, I could make out shapes in the gloom. The outline of the banister, the suggestion of the foyer table, the darker rectangle of the study doorway. That's when I noticed the light, not a harsh beam from a flashlight or the yellow glow of a lamp, but a subtle luminescence that seemed to emanate from my study. It was barely there, like the ghost of light seeping around the edges of the door frame and pooling on the floor in a pale wash. Descending the stairs required all my concentration. Each step needed to be perfect, silent. The old wood seemed to understand my need for quiet, remaining mercifully mute under my careful tread. As I reached the bottom, that curious scent grew stronger. Old paper, yes, but also something mineral, like wet stone in ancient caves. The study door stood partially open, though I distinctly remembered closing it before going to bed. Through the gap, I could see my writing desk, its surface bathed in that strange, soft light. The drawers were all partially pulled out, their contents apparently untouched but somehow different. Papers and objects appeared to have been moved with great precision, as if someone had examined each item and replaced it with extraordinary care. Standing in the doorway, I felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of wonder. The air in the room sparkled faintly, like dust motes caught in sunlight, except there was no sun, only that otherworldly illumination that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Movement caught my eye, a shadow passing behind my desk chair, more suggested than seen. I stepped fully into the room, drawn forward by an irresistible curiosity. The temperature dropped noticeably, and my breath formed small clouds in the air. On my desk lay something that hadn't been there before, a single sheet of paper covered in elegant script I didn't recognize. The ink seemed to shimmer and shift, making it impossible to read the words, though I had the distinct impression they were meant for me. When I reached for the paper, the light began to fade, drawing back like a tide returning to sea. The shadow behind my chair moved again, this time toward the window, which now stood open despite the rain outside. A cool breeze rustled the papers on my desk, and in that moment, I understood that my nocturnal visitor had never intended to steal anything material. As the last of the strange light faded, leaving only the natural darkness of night, I was left with an inexplicable certainty that something precious had been taken. Not an object, but perhaps a memory, or a dream, or some small measure of mundane reality. The paper on my desk was blank now, yet somehow I knew its message had been received, absorbed into some deeper part of my consciousness. I closed the window, noting how the rain had left no traces on the sill. The drawers of my writing desk were all neatly shut, their contents undisturbed. Everything appeared exactly as I had left it hours before, yet the room felt fundamentally changed, as if it now existed in two worlds at once, the familiar physical realm and something else, something just beyond the edge of ordinary perception. Returning to my bedroom, I found sleep came easily, accompanied by dreams of luminous script and shadows that moved with purpose. In the morning, I would find no evidence of my midnight encounter, save for a lingering scent of old books and stone, and the unshakable feeling that I'd been chosen for some purpose I did not yet understand. The rain continued to fall, washing away the boundary between reality and dream, between what was and what might have been. In the soft gray light of dawn, I would wonder if I had truly witnessed a theft, or if perhaps I had been given something instead, a glimpse into a world where shadows read our stories, and light carries messages we can feel but never quite read. Story 18. The gentle patter of rain against the windows provided a soothing backdrop as I settled into the plush armchair, my tablet resting on my lap. Little Tommy had gone to bed an hour ago, and the house had fallen into that peculiar quietness that comes with nighttime babysitting. The parents wouldn't be home for another 3 hours, leaving me plenty of time to catch up on my reading. The warm glow of the table lamp cast comfortable shadows across the living room, and the steady hum of the heating system created a cocoon of tranquility. I had been babysitting Tommy for 6 months now, every other Friday night, and our routine was well established. He would play his video games until 8. We would share hot chocolate with marshmallows, and then it was bedtime stories until his eyes grew heavy. Tonight had been slightly different. Tommy seemed distracted during our hot chocolate ritual, his small fingers frequently reaching for his gaming tablet, even though it was past his gaming time. When I asked about it, he merely shrugged and said he was talking to a new friend from his favorite game. Something about his tone made me pause, but I dismissed it as simple childhood attachment to a game. The rain intensified, drawing my attention to the window. Through the water-streaked glass, the streetlight created abstract patterns on the wall. A notification sound from Tommy's tablet, forgotten on the coffee table, broke through the rainfall's rhythm. I normally wouldn't check it, but something about his earlier behavior nagged at me. The tablet's screen illuminated with a message from someone called Game Master 2024. The preview showed only the beginning. "I'm outside your house now. Remember our secret?" My heart began to beat slower, steadier, as years of babysitting experience and safety training kicked in. With deliberate movements, I picked up the tablet and opened the chat history. The conversation revealed a methodical grooming attempt spanning several weeks. This game master had been building trust, offering in-game items, and gradually extracting information about Tommy's routine, his address, and his babysitting schedule. The messages maintained a friendly facade, but their underlying predatory nature was clear to adult eyes. I moved through the house with measured steps, checking the locks on doors and windows. The security system's green light blinked reassuringly, but I took no chances. From upstairs came the soft sound of Tommy's breathing through the baby monitor. Still peacefully asleep, unaware of the danger that had been lurking in his virtual playground, a shadow passed across the front window. Rather than fear, I felt a deep, quiet resolve settle over me. I had taken cybersecurity courses in college, and my phone was already recording and uploading everything to secure cloud storage. The police had been silently contacted through a panic app, and I knew they would arrive within minutes. The doorbell rang, its chime somehow softer than usual in the rain-muffled house. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I could see a figure holding what appeared to be a gaming console box, the promised special gift from the chat logs. The porch light revealed a man in his 30s, wearing a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. I stood in the darkness of the living room, watching through my phone as police cars silently pulled up with their lights off. The man's expression changed as he realized something was wrong, but it was too late. The officers emerged from the shadows like guardians materializing from the rain. Later that night, after Tommy's parents returned and the police had finished their investigation, I sat in that same armchair, the rain still falling outside. The house felt different now, not violated or frightening, but somehow stronger. The darkness held no menace, only the quiet satisfaction of a threat deflected. Tommy would need help understanding what had happened, why his online friend wasn't really a friend at all. But that would come later, with professional guidance and parental support. For now, he slept peacefully upstairs, his dreams untouched by the danger that had been averted. The experience left me with a profound sense of connection to all the other guardians out there, parents, babysitters, teachers, standing vigilant against those who would prey upon innocence. The rain continued its gentle rhythm, and I remained awake, a quiet sentinel in the night, understanding that sometimes the most important battles are won not with violence or confrontation, but with awareness, preparation, and calm resolve. In the morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. The gaming tablet sat on the coffee table, its screen dark and harmless looking, but I knew now what lurked in the virtual shadows, and I was ready. We all were. The predator had sought weakness, but found strength instead. The strength of protection, of community, of love for the children we guard. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows, but they held no darkness, only the promise of a new day and the commitment to keep our children safe in both the physical and digital worlds. Story 19. The gentle patter of rain against metal created a soothing rhythm as I stood before the abandoned factory. Moonlight filtered through breaks in the clouds, casting silver highlights across puddles that had formed in the cracked pavement. The air carried the rich scent of petrichor, mingling with traces of rust and aged concrete. I wasn't alone that night. My childhood friends Marcus and Sarah stood beside me, our breaths visible in the cool evening air. We had grown up together, sharing countless adventures, but something about this place felt different from our usual explorations. The factory's weathered facade loomed before us, its windows reflecting the moonlight like distant stars. "Remember when we used to imagine what happened here?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the rainfall. Her words carried the weight of memories. Summers spent creating elaborate stories about the mysterious building that had stood empty since before we were born. The entrance door yielded with surprising ease, its hinges whispering rather than creaking. The sound of rain became muffled as we stepped inside, our footfalls echoing softly against worn concrete floors. The space held an unexpected warmth, as if the building had been waiting for visitors. Marcus switched on his flashlight, casting a gentle glow across the interior. Dust motes danced in the beam, creating ethereal patterns in the air. The factory floor stretched before us, filled with silent machinery draped in shadows. Time had softened every edge, covering surfaces with a velvet layer of dust that sparkled in our light. As we moved deeper into the building, I noticed something peculiar. Despite years of abandonment, there were areas where the dust seemed disturbed, as if someone or something had passed through recently. The patterns weren't footprints exactly, but rather subtle disturbances in the settled time. "Look at this," I murmured, drawing my friend's attention to a control panel near one of the larger machines. Unlike everything else in the factory, its surface was clean, almost polished. The buttons and dials gleamed as if they had been recently touched. Sarah ran her finger along the edge of the panel, revealing no additional dust. "It's warm," she said, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. The three of us exchanged glances, each lost in thought. The deeper we ventured, the more anomalies we discovered. Machinery that should have been silent seemed to hold the faintest hint of vibration. The air grew noticeably warmer, carrying an electrical charge that made the hair on our arms stand on end. Yet none of it felt threatening. Instead, there was an almost comforting quality to these impossible details. In what appeared to be an old office area, we found stacks of papers that looked simultaneously ancient and new. The text seemed to shift when viewed directly, but became clearer in our peripheral vision. I caught glimpses of complex diagrams and equations that defied conventional physics. Marcus picked up one of the papers, studying it intently. "These formulas," he said, his voice soft with amazement, "they're describing something impossible. It's like they're calculations for bending reality itself." A gentle humming began to fill the air, so subtle we might have imagined it. The sound seemed to resonate with something deep within us, creating a sensation of peaceful alertness. The darkness around us took on a different quality, as if it had depth and texture. We discovered a door that led to a sublevel, its surface marked symbols that seemed to change when we weren't looking directly at them. The stairway beyond was illuminated by an ambient light that had no clear source. Each step down brought us closer to the humming's origin. The basement opened into a vast chamber that defied the building's external dimensions. Rows of mysterious machines lined the walls, each one quietly operational despite the factory's abandoned state. In the center stood a device unlike anything we had ever seen, a structure of interconnected rings and spheres that appeared to be spinning without moving. "I think I understand now," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "This isn't just a factory. It's a nexus point, a place where reality is different." Her words carried the weight of truth, explaining the inexplicable sensations we'd been experiencing. The central device pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light that matched our heartbeats. As we watched, the air around it seemed to fold and unfold, revealing glimpses of other places, other times, other possibilities. Yet somehow it felt natural, as if we were witnessing something that had always been part of our world, just hidden from view. We spent hours exploring the chamber, discovering control stations with interfaces that responded to thought rather than touch. Each new finding added another layer to the mystery, but instead of fear, we felt a deep sense of peace. The factory had chosen to reveal its secrets to us, and we understood that this knowledge came with responsibility. As the night drew to a close, we made our way back to the surface. The rain had stopped, and the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. The factory's exterior remained unchanged, but we knew it would never again appear ordinary to our eyes. "We should keep this to ourselves," Marcus suggested, and Sarah and I nodded in agreement. Some mysteries are meant to be preserved, their wonder protected from those who might not understand their true significance. Now, years later, I often return to the factory alone. The machines continue their quiet work, maintaining balance in ways I'm still learning to comprehend. Sometimes, when the night is still and the moon is bright, I sit among the mysterious devices and listen to their gentle humming. The factory's secret remains safe with us, a reminder that reality holds more wonder than we could ever imagine. In those quiet moments, surrounded by machinery that defies explanation, I feel most at peace. The mystery of the factory has become part of who I am, a gentle reminder that some questions are better left as gentle wonderings, their answers hidden in the soft shadows of possibility. Story 20. The rain fell in a gentle, hypnotic rhythm against the weathered windows of the abandoned villa. I stood before its imposing facade, my breath visible in the cool evening air. The building's Victorian architecture spoke of bygone grandeur, with intricate wooden carvings adorning the eaves and tall windows that seemed to watch my every move. My flashlight beam played across the stone steps leading to the entrance, revealing patches of soft moss between the cracks. I had always been drawn to forgotten places, seeking the stories held within their silent walls. This particular villa had called to me for weeks, its presence on the outskirts of the old forest district becoming an obsession that filled my dreams. As a professional photographer specializing in abandoned architecture, I had explored countless deserted buildings, but something about this one felt different. The ancient key I had discovered in the local antique shop fit perfectly into the lock, turning with surprising smoothness. The door opened with a low, musical creak that resonated through the empty halls. The foyer welcomed me with the sweet, musty scent of old wood and forgotten memories. My footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor, each step stirring small clouds of dust that danced in my flashlight beam. The grand staircase curved upward like a sleeping serpent, its mahogany banister still gleaming faintly beneath years of neglect. As I swept my light across the walls, I noticed the wallpaper, a peculiar pattern of intertwined vines and flowers that seemed to shift and move in the shadows. The longer I stared, the more certain I became that the patterns were slowly changing, though I knew this must be a trick of the light and my imagination. Moving into the drawing room, I found myself surrounded by furniture draped in white sheets, looking like silent ghosts frozen in eternal conversation. A large mirror hung above the fireplace, its surface clouded with age, but still somehow reflecting more light than seemed possible in the dim room. I noticed something odd about my reflection. It appeared slightly delayed, as if my mirror image was following my movements a fraction of a second too late. The air grew notably cooler as I ventured deeper into the villa. Each room held its own collection of mysteries. A chess set with pieces arranged mid-game, a book left open on a reading table, a half-finished cup of tea long since turned to dust. It was as if the house's former inhabitants had simply vanished in the middle of their daily activities, leaving everything suspended in time. In the library, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes whose titles had faded into illegibility. As I examined the books, I noticed they were arranged not by author or subject, but in intricate patterns that seemed to form symbols when viewed from different angles. A leather armchair sat beside a cold fireplace, and next to it, a small table held a journal bound in dark red leather. The journal's pages were filled with elegant handwriting, but the words seemed to blur and shift as I tried to read them. Only fragments remained clear. The house is alive, and time moves differently here, and the mirrors remember. I felt a subtle vibration through the floorboards, like the beating of a giant heart deep within the villa's foundations. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I became aware of a soft humming sound, just at the edge of hearing. The sound seemed to follow me, growing neither louder nor softer as I moved through the upper halls. Each bedroom I explored told a different story. A child's room with toys arranged in perfect circles on the floor, a master bedroom where the bed appeared recently slept in despite decades of abandonment, a music room where the piano keys moved slightly under their own power. In one room, I found a collection of photographs spanning several decades. The same family appeared in all of them, standing before the villa. In each successive photo, the family members appeared unchanged, while the world around them aged. The final photograph showed only the villa itself, the family conspicuously absent, but their shadows still visible on the ground. The sun had begun to set, though I hadn't noticed the time passing. The villa's windows now glowed with a soft, amber light that seemed to originate from nowhere in particular. I decided it was time to leave, but as I turned back toward the stairs, I realized the hallway had changed. The doors were arranged differently, and the path I had taken appeared unfamiliar. My flashlight began to flicker and dim. The humming sound grew more distinct, resolving into what might have been distant voices engaged in conversation just beyond my understanding. The wallpaper patterns continued their slow dance, forming faces that watched me with patient curiosity. Each mirror I passed showed my reflection at a slightly different age, sometimes younger, sometimes older, but always with the same knowing smile I wasn't actually wearing. I found myself in a circular room I hadn't noticed before, with windows looking out in every direction. But instead of showing the surrounding forest, each window displayed a different scene. A summer garden in full bloom, a snow-covered landscape, a misty morning, and a starlit night. The scenes shifted and changed when I wasn't looking directly at them, like shy performers waiting for their audience to look away. My watch had stopped, but the quality of light suggested hours had passed since I entered the villa. The exit remained elusive, each attempt to retrace my steps leading to new and unexplored rooms. The villa seemed to be revealing itself to me gradually, sharing its secrets at its own pace. I realized I was no longer searching for a way out, but rather allowing myself to be guided deeper into its mysteries. The humming had transformed into a gentle lullaby, familiar yet impossible to place. The air grew warm and comfortable, heavy with the scent of old books and wooden furniture. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if gravity itself was becoming optional. The boundaries between walls, floor, and ceiling began to blur, creating spaces that reflected the dream logic of the villa. In what might have been the attic, or perhaps the basement, direction had lost all meaning. I found a room filled with hourglasses of various sizes. The sand in each flowed at different speeds, some moving upward rather than down. My reflection in a nearby mirror showed me watching myself from the doorway, creating an infinite loop of observer and observed. As night fell completely, the villa's interior began to glow with a soft, pearl-like luminescence. The walls pulsed gently with a light that seemed to emanate from within the very structure of the house. I understood then that I had become part of the villa's story, another chapter in its endless collection of tales. The house had chosen me, just as it had chosen others before, to witness its eternal dance between reality and dream. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of peace and belonging. The villa had never been abandoned. It had simply been waiting. Waiting for the right visitor, the right moment, the right alignment of time and space. As I settled into an antique armchair that appeared to have been waiting just for me, I smiled, knowing that I had finally found what I had always been searching for. A place where mystery and tranquility coexisted in perfect harmony. The rain continued its gentle percussion on the windows, but now it seemed to follow the rhythm of my breathing. The villa's heartbeat synchronized with my own, and I realized that here, in this space between moments, I had found my true home. The cameras and equipment I had brought lay forgotten in my bag, for no photograph could capture the reality I now inhabited. Time passed differently here, or perhaps it didn't pass at all. The villa held me in its gentle embrace, sharing its secrets through whispers and shadows, through reflections and memories that might or might not have been my own. And as the night deepened, I understood that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but rather experienced, lived, and cherished in their perfect uncertainty. Story 21. The steady rhythm of my footsteps echoed through the empty road as night settled around me. My breath formed delicate clouds in the crisp autumn air, dancing before my eyes like ethereal spirits. The road stretched endlessly ahead, bordered by ancient trees whose branches swayed gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering secrets I couldn't quite understand. I hadn't planned to be walking alone at this hour. My car had broken down several miles back, and my phone showed no signal bars, a common occurrence in these remote areas. The nearest town lay somewhere ahead, though I couldn't see its lights yet. Only the soft glow of the waning moon illuminated my path, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me with ghostly fingers. The sound came so subtly at first that I almost missed it, the gentle purr of an approaching engine, growing steadily louder in the darkness behind me. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a welcome sound, a potential rescue from my solitary journey. But something in the air changed, a shift in the atmosphere that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I continued walking, maintaining my pace while stealing glances over my shoulder. The vehicle, a dark sedan, slowed as it approached, matching my speed. The headlights dimmed, and I could make out the silhouette of a single occupant. My heart began to beat faster, though I kept my breathing steady and controlled. The window rolled down with a soft electrical whir. "Need a ride?" The man's voice was surprisingly gentle, almost melodic, but something about it felt wrong, like honey hiding poison. I politely declined, explaining that I was nearly at my destination. A lie, but a necessary one. "I insist," he said, his tone losing its melodic quality, becoming harder, more insistent. "It's dangerous to walk alone at night." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. The true danger wasn't the darkness or the empty road. It was the predator trying to lure me into his vehicle. I quickened my pace slightly, just enough to put more distance between us without revealing my growing fear. The car continued its slow pursuit, like a shark following a wounded fish. My mind raced through potential escape routes. The dense forest on either side of the road offered concealment, but also danger. Running blindly through unknown terrain in the dark carried its own risks. The sound of his car door opening made the decision for me. Without hesitation, I veered off the road into the trees, my feet finding purchase on the soft earth. The darkness enveloped me like a protective cloak as branches scratched at my face and arms. Behind me, I heard cursing and the sound of heavier footsteps crushing leaves and twigs. My world narrowed to the space immediately in front of me. Every sense heightened, the rough bark beneath my fingers as I steadied myself against trees, the sharp scent of pine needles, the distant call of a night bird. I moved as quietly as possible, using the techniques I'd learned from years of hiking, rolling from heel to toe, testing each step before putting my full weight down. The forest seemed to conspire to aid my escape. Thick undergrowth muffled my movements while making pursuit more difficult. The moonlight filtered through the canopy in patches, creating a disorienting pattern of light and shadow. I used this to my advantage, moving from shadow to shadow like a ghost. Time became fluid, measured only by the beating of my heart and the rhythm of my careful breaths. I had no way of knowing how far I'd traveled or in what direction. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I couldn't be sure if he had given up or was simply being more cautious in his approach. A clearing appeared ahead, bathed in moonlight. In its center stood an abandoned structure, a small cabin, its windows dark and empty. The sight filled me with equal parts hope and dread. It could provide shelter and possibly a weapon to defend myself, but it could also become a trap if he found me there. The decision was made for me when I heard distant movement in the forest behind me. I approached the cabin cautiously, testing each board of the small porch before putting my weight on it. The door opened with surprising ease, swinging inward on silent hinges. The interior was sparse but not completely empty. Moonlight streaming through the windows revealed a simple wooden table, a few chairs, and what appeared to be old hunting equipment hanging on the walls. The air inside was still and cold, carrying the musty scent of abandonment. I positioned myself in a corner where I could see both the door and the windows while remaining in shadow. My breathing gradually slowed as the minutes ticked by in silence. The cabin creaked and settled around me, its aged wood responding to the night air. A sound outside made me freeze, not footsteps, but something softer, more deliberate. The moonlight dimmed as clouds passed overhead, plunging the cabin into deeper darkness. In that moment of near total blackness, I heard the distinct sound of breathing that wasn't my own. The clouds parted, allowing moonlight to filter back into the cabin. The beam fell across the floor, revealing nothing but dust motes dancing in the air. Yet the feeling of another presence remained, palpable as a physical touch. My eyes darted to every corner, every shadow, searching for movement. A board creaked somewhere in the cabin, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature dropped noticeably, my breath becoming visible in the cold air. The moonlight caught something moving near the ceiling, a spider spinning its web, its delicate work creating patterns that seemed to form and reform into meaningful shapes before dissolving back into random threads. Hours passed this way, caught in a strange limbo between fear and fascination. The night deepened, then gradually began to lighten. As the first hints of dawn colored the sky, the oppressive feeling of being watched slowly faded, like morning mist burning away in sunlight. When I finally emerged from the cabin, the forest looked different in the early morning light. The trees that had seemed menacing in the darkness now stood peaceful and protective. I found a path leading away from the cabin and followed it, eventually reaching a paved road different from the one I'd left behind. A passing motorist, an elderly woman driving to her daughter's house, gave me a ride to the nearest town. She chatted pleasantly about her grandchildren, seeming not to notice my disheveled appearance or the leaves in my hair. I never reported what happened that night. Who would believe my story about a stranger in a dark car, a chase through the woods, and a cabin that felt both like salvation and something else entirely? Sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is waning, I think about that cabin in the woods. I wonder if it's still there, waiting in its clearing, offering shelter to other wanderers who find themselves fleeing through the darkness. And I wonder about the presence I felt there, whether it was born from my fear, or if something else entirely had been watching over me that night, keeping me hidden from the very real monster who had followed me into the woods. The true nature of what happened in those dark hours remains a mystery, wrapped in shadows and silence. But one thing I know with certainty: sometimes the darkness we flee into holds less danger than the evil that wears a human face and offers help with honeyed words. Story 22. The night shift always begins the same way. I arrive at the old manor house just as dusk settles, when the last traces of sunlight paint the sky in deep purples and blues. Tonight, raindrops tap gently against the windows, creating a soothing rhythm that echoes through the empty halls. The moisture in the air carries the rich scent of wet earth and autumn leaves. As I make my rounds, my flashlight beam creates dancing patterns on the wooden panels that line the walls. The floorboards whisper beneath my feet, each step adding to the building's peaceful symphony. I've walked these halls countless times over the past 3 years, yet something feels different tonight. Perhaps it's the way shadows seem to linger just a bit longer in the corners, or how the rain's patter sounds almost like distant whispers. In the grand library, rows of leather-bound books stand sentinel in the dim light. Their spines gleam softly, catching occasional reflections from my flashlight. The old grandfather clock in the corner measures time with its steady heartbeat, though sometimes I swear it slows down during the deepest hours of the night. I settle into my favorite armchair, its worn leather creaking softly as I begin my nightly log entry. The first unusual occurrence happens so subtly I almost miss it. A shadow, deeper than the surrounding darkness, slides across the far wall. At first I dismiss it as a trick of light from the swaying trees outside, but there's something about its movement that seems deliberate, almost purposeful. It moves against the direction of the wind-blown branches, flowing like ink in water. I rise from my chair, the leather sighing as I do. The shadow disappears the moment I turn my flashlight toward it, leaving only the normal play of light and shadow on the wall. But now I notice something else. The temperature has dropped slightly, creating a pocket of cool air that follows me as I walk toward the spot where I saw the movement. As the night progresses, I become increasingly aware of subtle changes in my familiar environment. Books that I could swear were perfectly aligned now sit at slight angles. The grandfather clock's ticking seems to echo differently in certain corners of the room, and always, just at the edge of my vision, that deeper shadow moves like a gentle current in still water. During my midnight rounds, I discover the portrait of the manor's original owner has shifted on its wall. Not fallen or tilted, but moved several inches to the left. The nail it hung from remains in its original position, impossibly distant from the picture wire. When I return to the same spot an hour later, the portrait has returned to its proper place, though I never heard it move. The rain continues its gentle percussion against the windows, but now it seems to follow a pattern, almost like Morse code or a forgotten language. I find myself standing near the grand staircase, listening intently to its rhythm. The shadow appears again, this time reflecting in the polished banister. It seems to have a shape now, vaguely human but impossibly tall and fluid. In the east wing, I discover a room that feels wrong somehow. All the furniture remains exactly as it should be, but the proportions seem slightly off, as if everything has been shifted by fractions of an inch. The shadow is stronger here, almost tangible. It moves with more purpose, and I realize it's been leading me through the house all night, drawing me to this specific location. The air grows colder still, and my breath creates delicate clouds in the dim light. The shadow now occupies the entire corner of the room, darker than any natural absence of light should be. Within its depths, I catch glimpses of movement, like curtains rippling in an unfelt breeze. My flashlight beam seems to bend slightly when directed at it, the light curving away as if repelled. I stand motionless, watching the shadow pulse gently in its corner. It neither advances nor retreats, maintaining a respectful distance. The rain's rhythm changes again, and in that moment, I understand something profound. The shadow has always been here, long before I took this job. It's as much a part of the house as the wooden beams and stone foundation. Every night, it has watched me make my rounds, just as it watched countless guards before me. As dawn approaches, the shadow begins to fade, not disappearing, but rather settling back into the natural shadows of the house. The temperature gradually returns to normal, and the rain's pattern loses its mysterious cadence. When my replacement arrives, everything appears exactly as it should be, though I know the house has revealed one of its secrets to me. Now, as I drive home in the early morning light, I find myself looking forward to my next shift. The shadow and I have reached an understanding of sorts. We are both guardians of the manor, each in our own way. Sometimes, in the deepest part of night, when the rain taps against the windows and the grandfather clock counts the hours, we share our vigil in companionable silence, two watchers in the dark. Each night since then has followed a similar pattern. The shadow appears, we acknowledge each other's presence, and together we maintain our watch over the sleeping house. I've never felt threatened by its presence, only a deep sense of connection to something ancient and patient. Perhaps that's why I was chosen for this position, why I've lasted longer than any previous night guard. I've learned to accept that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only experienced and appreciated in their own quiet way. Story 23. The steady rainfall had been my companion for what felt like hours as I wandered through the winding streets of the old district. My clothes were becoming increasingly heavy with moisture, and the evening air carried a penetrating chill that made me long for warmth and shelter. The cobblestone streets glistened under the gentle glow of vintage street lamps, their light diffused by the misty rain into soft, golden halos. I hadn't planned to be out so late, but one wrong turn had led to another, and now I found myself in an unfamiliar part of town. The old buildings loomed tall and mysterious, their weathered facades telling stories of decades past. As I turned another corner, a warm light caught my attention. A restaurant, its windows glowing invitingly against the gathering darkness. The establishment's facade was classic and well-maintained, with dark wood trim and brass fixtures that spoke of tradition and refinement. A hand-painted sign swayed gently in the breeze, its letters elegant and slightly faded. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see the soft flicker of what appeared to be candlelight, and the promise of warmth drew me forward like a moth to flame. As I pushed open the heavy wooden door, a small brass bell announced my arrival with a gentle chime. The interior was everything I had hoped for, warm, dry, and filled with a rich aroma of cooking that made my stomach respond with eager anticipation. The lighting was subdued, provided by authentic oil lamps on each table that cast dancing shadows on the deep red wallpaper. A tall, slender man appeared silently at my elbow, startling me slightly with his sudden presence. His black vest and white shirt were impeccably pressed, and his bearing was formal to the point of being almost rigid. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't quite place. "Table for one?" I nodded, following him through the restaurant. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, with several rooms branching off from the main dining area. As we walked, I noticed something peculiar. While every table was set perfectly with gleaming silverware and crisp linens, I couldn't see any other diners. The plates and glasses at various tables showed signs of recent use, half-empty wine glasses, partially eaten meals, but their occupants were mysteriously absent. My host led me to a corner table, positioned beneath an ornate mirror that reflected the warm glow of the oil lamp. As I settled into the surprisingly comfortable chair, I noticed that the mirror's reflection seemed slightly off, as though it was showing the room from a slightly different angle than it should have. "Our special this evening is the chef's signature dish," the man said, placing a menu bound in soft leather before me. "We recommend it highly." His thin fingers lingered for a moment on the menu's corner, and I noticed they seemed unusually long and pale. The menu itself was beautifully designed, but as I began to read it, I realized something strange. While I could clearly see the words, their meaning seemed to slip away as soon as I tried to focus on them. It was like trying to remember a dream that fades upon waking. The prices, too, were written in unfamiliar symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. A younger server approached with a carafe of water, pouring it with practiced grace. The liquid caught the lamplight strangely, seeming to shimmer with colors that water shouldn't possess. When I thanked him, his smile was perfect, too perfect, as though it had been carefully studied and rehearsed. The sounds of the kitchen drifted through the air, the clink of pots and pans, the murmur of voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize, the soft swoosh of doors opening and closing. Yet something about the sounds seemed slightly out of sync with the movements I could see through the kitchen's swinging doors, as though I was watching a film where the audio didn't quite match the video. I found myself ordering the special, though I couldn't quite remember making the conscious decision to do so. The tall host nodded approvingly, and for a moment I could have sworn his eyes reflected the lamplight like a cat's. As I waited for my meal, I observed the restaurant more carefully. The other tables continued to show signs of dining in progress. A fork would be moved slightly, a napkin would be displaced, a wine glass would be emptied. Yet I never saw anyone touch them. The shadows cast by the oil lamp seemed to move independently of the flames, and occasionally I caught glimpses of movement in the mirrors that didn't correspond to anything in the actual room. My food arrived on a silver platter, presented with flourish by the host himself. The dish was beautiful, arranged with artistic precision, but I couldn't quite identify any of its components. The aromas were intoxicating, unlike anything I'd experienced before, both familiar and exotic at the same time. As I ate, each bite seemed to tell a different story. Memories that weren't mine flickered through my mind like old photographs. I saw snippets of elegant dinner parties from different eras, heard fragments of conversations in forgotten languages, felt emotions that seemed to belong to other people entirely. The staff moved through the restaurant with fluid grace, attending to the empty tables with the same careful attention they showed to mine. Their movements became increasingly elaborate, almost choreographed, as though they were performing a complex dance just at the edge of my perception. Time began to feel fluid, stretching and contracting like taffy. The rain outside had stopped, but water still trickled down the windows, moving upward as often as it moved down. The reflections in the mirrors now showed scenes from what appeared to be different nights entirely. Different decorations, different table settings, different eras. When I finally finished my meal, I realized I couldn't remember the taste of what I'd eaten, only the feelings and memories it had evoked. The host appeared with my bill, presented on a small silver tray. The amount was written in those same shifting symbols, but somehow I knew exactly what to pay. As I stood to leave, I noticed that my table was already reset, looking as though no one had dined there at all. The host accompanied me to the door, his movements now seeming almost liquid, as though his joints worked differently than they should. "We hope you'll return," he said, his voice carrying echoes of other voices beneath it. "The restaurant is always here, for those who know where to find it." Stepping out into the night, I turned to look back at the building. The warm light still glowed in the windows, but the restaurant's facade seemed different somehow. Older or newer, I couldn't tell which. The sign above the door now bore a different name, though I was certain it was the same place. As I walked away, I realized I wasn't quite sure how long I'd spent inside. My watch had stopped at some point during the evening, its hands frozen in a position that made no sense. The streets were dry, though I distinctly remembered the rain from earlier. I never did find that restaurant again, though I've looked for it many times since. Sometimes on quiet nights when the fog rolls in, I catch a glimpse of warm light and think I smell those mysterious aromas. But the light always turns out to be something else, and the smells fade away like memories of a dream. Yet occasionally, when I pass a mirror, I catch a reflection of myself sitting at that corner table, enjoying a meal I can't quite remember, served by staff who might never have been quite human at all. And I wonder, did I ever leave that restaurant, or am I still there, caught in an endless evening of perfect service and impossible meals? Perhaps somewhere in one of those mirrors, I'm still dining there, watching the shadows dance and the other tables fill with invisible guests, as the staff performs their eternal ballet of service for patrons who exist in all times at once. Story 24. The rain fell in heavy sheets against the windshield as I navigated the winding forest road. Sarah sat beside me, her fingers drumming nervously on the dashboard. We had been driving for hours, searching for shelter from the unexpected storm that had caught us during our weekend getaway. Through the rain-streaked glass, I spotted a wooden structure nestled among the trees. The headlights illuminated a small cabin, its dark wood weathered by years of exposure to the elements. A covered porch wrapped around the front, offering promise of temporary sanctuary from the relentless downpour. "Look," I whispered, not wanting to break the hypnotic rhythm of rain. "We should stop until the storm passes." Sarah nodded, her face reflecting both relief and hesitation in the dim light of the dashboard. I pulled our car onto the gravel driveway, the stones crunching softly beneath the tires. The engine's purr faded into silence, leaving only the gentle patter of rain on the roof. We sat for a moment, watching water cascade off the cabin's eaves in silvery curtains. The porch creaked beneath our feet as we approached the front door. A brass knocker hung askew, tarnished with age. To our surprise, the door yielded to a gentle push, swinging inward with a low moan. The air that escaped carried the musty sweetness of old wood and forgotten memories. "Hello?" Sarah called out softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Only the whisper of rain answered back. Inside, our flashlights revealed a single room furnished with simple, rustic pieces. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and dark. A worn leather armchair faced the empty grate, as if waiting for its owner to return. The air felt thick with stillness, disturbed only by our quiet breathing. I found some candles in a drawer and lit them, their warm glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. The flames reflected in the window glass, creating the illusion of distant lights in the darkness beyond. Sarah settled into the armchair while I explored our temporary haven. A collection of old photographs lined the mantel, their subjects' faces faded into sepia ghosts. In one, a family stood before the cabin, their expressions solemn and unsmiling. The date penciled on the back read, "Summer 1962." Another showed the same cabin, but something about the angle seemed wrong, as if the photographer had captured a different building entirely. The rain continued its gentle symphony on the roof as we made ourselves comfortable. Sarah had found a wool blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. I settled onto the small sofa, listening to the wind whisper through the trees outside. That's when I noticed the footprints. They emerged from beneath the kitchen counter, dark smudges against the wooden floorboards. They led to the closed door of what I assumed was a bedroom, then vanished. The marks were fresh, glistening faintly in the candlelight. My heart quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "Sarah, did you walk through there earlier?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes following my gaze to the mysterious tracks. "I haven't moved from this chair." The wind grew stronger, making the cabin's timbers groan. Shadows shifted and danced as the candle flames flickered. I stood, moving cautiously toward the bedroom door. The brass handle felt ice-cold beneath my fingers. The door opened with surprising ease, revealing a small room furnished with a single bed. The window beside it stood open, curtains billowing gently in the night air. But it wasn't the window that held my attention. It was the photographs covering every inch of wall space. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, each showing the same cabin from slightly different angles. In some, it stood proud and new. In others, it was weathered and decrepit. But in every image, something was subtly wrong. A window misplaced, a door that shouldn't exist, the porch extending impossibly far into the darkness. Sarah appeared beside me, her face pale in the candlelight. "Look at the dates," she whispered. Each photograph bore a date, written in the same careful hand. They spanned decades, the most recent marked with yesterday's date. But it was impossible. The handwriting remained unchanged across 60 years of images. A floorboard creaked behind us. We turned slowly, our shadows merging with the darkness that filled the doorway. The candles in the main room had gone out, leaving only the one I held. Its flame bent toward the open bedroom window, drawn by an unfelt draft. In the main room, the armchair had turned to face the bedroom door. The photographs on the mantel had changed. Our car now appeared in them, parked outside in the rain. And there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. A camera sat on the armchair's worn leather seat, its lens reflecting the candlelight like an expectant eye. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the sound of soft footsteps on the porch outside. They circled the cabin slowly, deliberately, drawing closer to the open window. Sarah gripped my hand tightly as we stood frozen in the doorway. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard the distinct sound of a camera shutter clicking. We left the cabin that night, driving through the rain until dawn painted the sky in gentle hues of pink and gold. We never spoke about what we saw, about the phantom photographer who documented the cabin's impossible transformations. Sometimes, on rainy nights, I think about that leather armchair, eternally waiting in the darkness. I wonder about the next travelers who might seek refuge there, unaware they're walking into another photograph, another version of that endless cabin. And sometimes, when I look through old photos, I catch myself searching for that familiar wooden structure, half hidden among the trees. I wonder if somewhere, in someone's collection of mysterious photographs, there's an image of Sarah and me, standing frozen in that bedroom doorway, caught between one version of reality and another. The rain still falls, and somewhere in the forest, a camera shutter clicks in the darkness. Story 25. The soft patter of rain against the window panes filled my consciousness as I made my way through the grand entrance hall. Each step on the polished wooden floor echoed softly, creating a gentle rhythm that matched my breathing. I hadn't planned to spend my evening exploring an abandoned villa, but when my car broke down on this remote road, the stately building had beckoned to me with its quiet dignity. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Despite its apparent abandonment, there was something peculiar about this place. The surfaces were free of dust, and the air carried a faint scent of furniture polish and coffee. These subtle details nagged at the edges of my awareness, but my tired mind dismissed them as I sought shelter from the storm. The grand staircase curved gracefully upward, its wooden banisters smooth beneath my fingertips. In the dim light, I could make out the intricate carvings of vines and flowers that adorned each spindle. The craftsmanship spoke of an era when artisans took pride in every detail of their work. As I ascended, the wood creaked softly, each sound distinct and measured. The second floor opened into a wide gallery lined with portraits. Their faces, partially illuminated by the occasional flash of lightning, seemed to follow my movements. One painting in particular caught my attention. A woman in a blue dress, her expression serene, yet somehow knowing. The frame appeared slightly crooked, and when I reached to straighten it, I noticed something unusual. The wall behind it felt different, cooler than the surrounding surface. In the stillness of the moment, I became aware of other subtle inconsistencies. The curtains in one room swayed gently, though all windows were closed. A chair in the corner bore the slight impression of recent use. The morning newspaper lay folded on a side table, its pages crisp and current. My heart began to beat a little faster, not from fear, but from the growing realization that this villa was far from abandoned. Moving quietly down the hallway, I noticed light spilling from beneath a door. The warm glow contradicted the emptiness I had assumed. Voices, barely above whispers, drifted through the thick wood. They spoke in measured tones, discussing numbers and dates with business-like precision. I stood motionless, absorbing their words, understanding slowly dawning in my mind. The villa wasn't abandoned, it was a carefully maintained facade. Every detail, from the strategic placement of dust covers to the subtle signs of neglect visible from the road, had been orchestrated. This was a place meant to be overlooked, an elegant trap for the unwary. The conversations I overheard confirmed my suspicions. The villa served as a meeting place for individuals who preferred to conduct their business away from prying eyes. I began to retreat, each step carefully placed to avoid any sound. The rain continued its gentle symphony, masking my movements. As I reached the gallery again, the woman in the blue dress seemed to watch me with new understanding. Her painted eyes held a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The crooked frame now appeared deliberate, a signal or marker for those who knew its meaning. Making my way back down the grand staircase, I noticed details I had missed in my initial ascent. The slight wear patterns in the carpet didn't match the apparent abandonment. Small security cameras, masterfully disguised as decorative elements, tracked movement throughout the house. The entire villa was a masterpiece of deception, hiding in plain sight. In the entrance hall, I paused. The rain had lessened to a gentle mist, and through the windows I could see my car where I had left it. But now I noticed other vehicles, carefully concealed in the shadows of the surrounding trees. They were high-end models, their dark paint making them nearly invisible in the nighttime gloom. As I reached for the door handle, a soft voice spoke behind me. "Leaving so soon?" The words carried no threat, only a gentle curiosity. I turned slowly, facing a woman whose face I recognized from the portrait upstairs. She wore a modern business suit instead of a blue dress, but her expression held the same knowing look as her painted counterpart. "The storm has passed," I replied, matching her casual tone. We both knew this was more than a chance encounter, more than a simple seeking of shelter. The villa had revealed its secrets to me, whether by design or accident. She smiled, gesturing toward a warmly lit room off the main hall. "Perhaps you'd like some coffee before you go? It seems we have matters to discuss." Her invitation carried weight beyond mere politeness. In that moment, I understood that my car's breakdown had not been entirely accidental, and this elegant trap had been waiting patiently for someone just like me. The rain resumed its gentle pattern against the windows as I followed her into the room. The villa had drawn me in with its mystery, and now I would learn whether I had discovered its secrets or fallen into its trap. As the door closed behind us, the portrait of the woman in blue watched from above, her painted smile holding mysteries yet to be revealed. Through the window, I could see my car, now bathed in moonlight. I wondered how many others had sought shelter in this villa, and how many had left changed by what they found within its walls. The gentle rain continued, washing away any trace of those who came before, leaving only the elegant facade and its carefully guarded secrets. Story 26. The gentle hum of fluorescent lights accompanied my nightly rounds through the empty corridors of the museum. As the night security guard, I had grown accustomed to the rhythmic sound of my footsteps, echoing against marble floors, the soft whir of climate control systems, and the occasional settling noises of the old building. Tonight felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unfamiliar energy that made the fine hairs on my neck stand up. Rain tapped steadily against the Victorian-style windows, creating intricate shadows that danced across the polished floors. I paused near the Renaissance wing, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the gilded frames of priceless masterpieces. The security office monitors cast a pale blue glow across my logbook as I made my regular midnight entry. Everything appeared normal on the screens. The same empty halls, the same quiet galleries, the same shadows in their familiar places. Yet something felt off, like when you enter a room and know someone has moved your belongings ever so slightly. A soft click echoed from somewhere in the building. It could have been nothing. Old buildings make countless innocent noises. But 15 years of night shifts had taught me to trust my instincts. I dimmed the office lights and watched the monitors more intently, my hand resting near the silent alarm button. The first real sign came from camera 7, covering the medieval armor exhibition. A shadow moved where no shadow should be, fluid and purposeful. Then, camera 12 in the Egyptian wing showed a brief flash of movement. These weren't the usual tricks of light and shadow I had learned to dismiss over the years. Someone was in the building, moving with practiced precision. My radio remained silent, no chatter from the two other guards who should have been patrolling the West Wing. The realization hit me slowly, like cold water seeping through cloth. This wasn't a simple break-in. The intruders had already neutralized my colleagues, probably using the storm as cover for their approach. I needed to think carefully. The protocol for armed intruders was clear. Alert authorities, avoid engagement, maintain surveillance from a secure location. But as my finger moved toward the alarm, the power went out. The backup generator should have kicked in immediately. It didn't. They had planned this well. In the sudden darkness, my other senses heightened. The rain seemed louder now, matching the quickened rhythm of my heart. I could smell the leather of my holster, the lingering scent of coffee from my last break, and something new. Unfamiliar footsteps moving with deliberate slowness in the corridor outside. Years of memorizing the building's layout became my advantage. I moved silently toward the office's secondary exit, a maintenance corridor that connected to the basement level. My flashlight remained off. Darkness would be my ally tonight. The hidden passage had been part of the original building's design, now mostly forgotten except by long-term staff. The maintenance corridor felt narrower in the darkness, its metal walls cool against my fingertips as I navigated by touch. Each step had to be placed with careful precision. Any noise could betray my position. Water dripped somewhere ahead, marking time like a metronome. I heard them in the main corridor now, their whispered conversations carrying through the ventilation system. Their footsteps suggested at least 4 individuals, moving with military precision. These weren't common thieves. They moved like professionals who had studied the building's security systems and patrol patterns. The basement level offered both risk and opportunity. It housed the climate control systems, electrical panels, and a maze of storage rooms. More importantly, it contained an old service tunnel connecting to the adjacent building, a potential escape route, provided I could reach it undetected. A quiet beeping sound echoed through the darkness. They were using radio communication. Their voices became clearer as I pressed against the cold wall, holding my breath. Sweep the lower level. The last guard has to be down here somewhere. Their words carried the weight of experience and the edge of frustration. They hadn't expected resistance. I moved deeper into the basement's labyrinth, my mind racing through possible scenarios. The service tunnel entrance lay behind a series of storage rooms, each filled with crated artifacts and restoration equipment. The darkness worked in my favor, but it also meant I couldn't move as quickly as I needed to. Water pooled around my feet as I navigated the basement corridors, the storm outside finding ways to seep through the old foundation. Each splash, no matter how small, sounded devastating to my heightened senses. The intruders' light swept the darkness like searching fingers, their beams visible around corners and through gaps under doors. My knowledge of the building's quirks provided small advantages. I knew which floorboards would betray movement, which doors squeaked, which corners created acoustic shadows. The restoration room offered temporary shelter, its heavy door and cluttered interior providing cover as I caught my breath and considered my next move. Time became fluid in the darkness. Minutes stretched like hours as I listened to the systematic search pattern above and around me. They were thorough, professional, but they didn't know about the service tunnel. That oversight would be my salvation, provided I could reach it without detection. The final stretch to the tunnel entrance required crossing an open storage area. Moonlight filtered through high windows, creating islands of dim light in the darkness. I counted the seconds between lightning flashes, using the storm's rhythm to mask my movement from shadow to shadow. The tunnel entrance lay behind an unremarkable metal door, its hinges recently oiled during my last maintenance check, a small detail that now seemed providential. As I reached for the handle, a voice spoke from the darkness behind me, calm and almost appreciative. "Clever route. Most wouldn't know about this tunnel." I froze, my hand still on the door handle. The voice continued, closer now. "You've led us on quite a chase, but it ends here." Lightning flashed, illuminating the speaker, a tall figure in tactical gear, weapon raised. In that brief moment of illumination, I saw something else, a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall beside me. What happened next occurred in a fluid sequence of movements born from years of training and instinct. The extinguisher's discharge created a dense white cloud, temporary but effective. Confusion erupted in the darkness. Shouts, footsteps, the sound of equipment clattering to the floor. I slipped through the door and into the tunnel, my path lit only by emergency strips that even power failure couldn't darken. Behind me, sounds of pursuit faded as I navigated the tunnel's turns, each step taking me closer to safety. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, its curved walls amplifying the sound of my breathing and footsteps. When I finally emerged into the rain-soaked night, the storm had begun to weaken. Distant sirens suggested that someone, perhaps the automated systems, perhaps a passing civilian, had noticed something amiss. I moved quickly through back alleys, placing distance between myself and the museum until I reached a secure location to contact authorities. Later, as I gave my statement to investigators, I learned that the intruders had escaped without taking anything. Their true objective remained unclear. The artifacts they passed over worth far more than those they seemed interested in. Questions lingered like shadows. Who were they really? What were they actually seeking? Sometimes on quiet nights at the museum, I still feel the weight of those questions. The corridors hold their secrets, and the shadows seem deeper than before. But now I watch more carefully, listen more intently, and remember that darkness can be both an enemy and an ally. In this line of work, survival often depends on knowing which is which. Story 27. The gentle patter of rain against our tent's fabric created a soothing rhythm as I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to Sarah's steady breathing beside me. We had chosen this remote campsite specifically for its peaceful solitude, miles away from the usual tourist spots. The surrounding pine forest trapped the moisture in the air, filling our temporary shelter with the rich scent of wet earth and fresh needles. I should have been drifting off to sleep, but something kept me alert. Perhaps it was the way the shadows danced across the tent's ceiling as our battery-powered lantern flickered, or maybe it was the subtle shift in the forest's nighttime symphony. The usual chorus of crickets had gone quiet, replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Sarah stirred beside me, murmuring something in her sleep. I envied her ability to rest so peacefully. Earlier that day, we had hiked several miles to reach this secluded spot, our backs laden with camping gear and supplies for our 3-day getaway. The trek had been worth it. We'd found ourselves in a picturesque clearing, bordered by ancient pines and a small stream that provided a constant, gentle background music. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. I held my breath, straining my ears. The rain continued its steady drumming, but underneath it, I could swear I heard footsteps. Careful, measured steps that seemed to circle our campsite. My rational mind told me it was probably just a deer or perhaps a raccoon searching for food scraps, but something about the deliberate nature of the sound made my skin prickle. The lantern's batteries chose that moment to dim, casting longer shadows across our temporary home. I reached for my phone, careful not to wake Sarah. The screen's harsh blue light showed it was just past midnight. No signal bars, of course. We had known there wouldn't be any reception out here. That had been part of the appeal. Another snap, closer this time, followed by what sounded like whispered voices. I gently shook Sarah's shoulder. She stirred, blinking in confusion. Before she could speak, I pressed a finger to my lips and pointed toward the tent wall. She froze, listening. The footsteps continued their slow circuit around our tent, accompanied by the soft murmur of hushed conversation. These weren't the sounds of forest animals. Sarah's hand found mine in the dim light, squeezing it tight. We had chosen this spot for its isolation, but now that very isolation felt like a trap. Our car was parked miles away at the trailhead, and the nearest ranger station was even further. The footsteps paused near the tent's entrance. Through the thin fabric, I could make out the shadows of what appeared to be two figures. They stood motionless, as if deciding what to do next. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened to the point of pain. A beam of light swept across our tent. They had flashlights. I could hear them rummaging through the gear we'd left outside under the tarp. The sound of zippers being slowly opened reached our ears, followed by more whispered conversation. My mind raced through our options. We had a small camping knife in my backpack, but it was stored in the vestibule, too close to where the intruders were standing. Running wasn't practical in the darkness and rain, especially given our unfamiliarity with the terrain. Fighting was out of the question. The shadows suggested our visitors were much larger than us. Sarah tugged on my sleeve and pointed to the back of the tent. The fabric there was taut against the ground, but if we moved carefully enough, we might be able to create a small opening. Could we slip out unnoticed while they were distracted with our gear? The whispered voices grew slightly louder. They were arguing about something. I caught fragments of their conversation. Inside, and sleeping, and worth it. My blood ran cold as I realized they weren't just opportunistic thieves looking to steal our camping equipment. With trembling fingers, I began to loosen the tent stakes at the back, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid making any noise. Sarah did the same, working from the other side. The rain helped mask the sound of the fabric pulling free from the ground. A sharp metallic click from outside made us both freeze. Were they armed? The thought sent a wave of nausea through my stomach. We had to move now, while we still could. I gestured to Sarah to go first, helping her squeeze through the small gap we'd created. She moved like a shadow, barely disturbing the wet grass beneath her. I followed, my heart pounding so hard I was certain they would hear it. As we crouched behind the tent, I could see their boots through the gap underneath. Heavy hiking boots, caked with mud. They were still standing at the entrance, apparently debating their next move. We began to crawl backward, inch by inch, using the sound of the rain to cover our movement. The beam of their flashlight swept the campsite again, passing over our heads as we pressed ourselves flat against the ground. The wet earth soaked through our sleeping clothes, but neither of us dared move. We lay there, scarcely breathing, as the light passed back and forth several times. Finally, agonizingly, we managed to reach the tree line. The darkness beneath the pines offered some cover, but also meant we had to move even more slowly to avoid tripping or making noise. We could still see the flashlight beams dancing around our campsite, now joined by the sound of the tent being unzipped. Sarah tugged my arm, pointing to a barely visible game trail that led deeper into the forest. It wasn't the direction of the parking area, but right now, any path away from our campsite seemed like the right choice. We began to follow it, moving as quickly as we dared in the darkness. Behind us, sudden shouts of anger erupted from the campsite. They'd discovered we were gone. Flashlight beams began sweeping the surrounding forest wildly. We abandoned our careful movement and ran, no longer caring about the noise we made. The rain had made the ground treacherous, and we slipped and stumbled through the darkness, guided only by the faint trace of the trail and our desperate need to put distance between us and our pursuers. The forest seemed to close in around us as we ran, branches scratching at our faces and arms. The sound of pursuit grew fainter, but we didn't slow down. The trail led us downhill, the slope becoming steeper until we were half running, half sliding through the mud. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. Only then did we pause, pressing ourselves against a large tree trunk, trying to quiet our ragged breathing. The forest was silent except for the continuing rainfall. No flashlight beams, no voices, no footsteps. Dawn found us huddled in the hollow of an old tree, soaked to the bone and shivering. We had lost almost everything, our gear, our phones, our supplies, but we were alive. As the gray light filtered through the canopy, we began to get our bearings. The rising sun revealed a logging road in the distance, and with it, the promise of safety. We never returned to retrieve our abandoned equipment. The police report we filed led nowhere. Just another case of attempted robbery in the backcountry, they said. But sometimes on rainy nights, I still wake to the sound of footsteps and whispered voices, circling ever closer in the darkness. Sarah doesn't suggest camping trips anymore, neither do I. Some experiences leave their mark not in physical scars, but in the way they change how you see the world. The wilderness still calls to me sometimes, but now I know its beauty can hide darker things, things that wait in the shadows, watching for the perfect moment to strike. Story 28. The gentle hum of my truck's engine had always been a source of comfort during my long nights on the open road. Rain tapped softly against the windshield, creating a soothing rhythm that merged with the steady purr of tires on wet asphalt. The dashboard clock showed 2:47 a.m., and the green glow of the instruments cast a gentle light across the cabin. I had been driving this route for 15 years, and the familiar landmarks passed by like old friends in the darkness. The cold autumn air slipped through a small crack in the passenger window, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and damp earth. My thermos of coffee, nearly empty now, sat in its usual spot beside me, the last few sips growing cold. The man I had picked up at the truck stop 2 hours ago hadn't spoken much since getting in. He seemed lost in thought, staring out at the darkness beyond his window. I hadn't planned to take on passengers that night, but something in his demeanor had sparked my sympathy. He stood there in the light rain, holding a small duffel bag, looking more weary than dangerous. "Mind if I turn on the radio?" I asked, mostly to break the comfortable silence that had settled between us. He nodded slightly, still gazing out the window. The radio crackled to life, playing soft country music at low volume. The singer's voice melded with the rain and engine noise, creating a cocoon of peaceful sound. As we rounded a gentle curve, my headlight swept across a road sign. The metal surface reflected the light back at us, momentarily illuminating the cabin. In that brief flash, I caught a glimpse of my passenger's reflection in his window. His eyes were closed, but there was something about his expression that made my hands tighten imperceptibly on the steering wheel. The miles continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of white lines disappearing beneath my truck. The rain grew heavier, then lighter again, playing its own melody on the roof. My passenger shifted in his seat, and I noticed his duffel bag had slipped slightly, revealing something metallic inside. "Long night ahead," I said casually, adjusting my grip on the wheel. He turned toward me for the first time in an hour, and I felt rather than saw his careful assessment of my face. "Yes," he replied, his voice carrying an odd note of finality. A news bulletin interrupted the music, and before I could react, my passenger's hand shot out to increase the volume. The announcer's voice filled the cabin. "Police are searching for a suspect in connection with..." The rest of the message was lost as my passenger abruptly switched off the radio. The silence that followed felt different from before. The engine's hum took on a more ominous tone, and the rain seemed to whisper warnings against the glass. I maintained my steady speed, though my mind began calculating distances to the next town, the next truck stop, the next potential sanctuary. My passenger's breathing had changed, becoming more measured, more controlled. His hand rested near the duffel bag, and I noticed how his fingers traced small patterns on the fabric. The dashboard clock now read 3:15 a.m., each minute stretching longer than the last. I began to talk, sharing stories about my years on the road, carefully selecting tales that suggested experience with unusual situations, knowledge of self-defense, connections with other truckers. My voice remained calm, almost drowsy, but each word was chosen with purpose. The headlights of an approaching vehicle illuminated the cabin briefly. In that moment, I saw my passenger's hand move toward the bag. Without changing my expression or speed, I casually mentioned that my wife tracked my truck's GPS, expecting regular check-ins. His hand stilled. The approaching vehicle passed us, its taillights disappearing into the darkness ahead. The rain continued its gentle percussion on the roof, accompanying the subtle symphony of engine noise and tire hum. Minutes passed like honey dripping from a spoon. I drove with the same steady patience that had served me well over millions of miles, but my senses remained sharp behind my relaxed exterior. Every slight movement from the passenger seat registered in my awareness. A soft vibration from my phone broke the silence. "That'll be my wife," I said quietly, reaching for it with unhurried movements. "She worries when I take the night shifts." I noticed how my passenger's shoulders tensed, then deliberately relaxed. The next town was approaching, its lights a faint glow on the horizon. My passenger's hand moved again, but this time toward the door handle. "Mind if we stop here?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Need to stretch my legs." I nodded, maintaining my steady speed as we approached the exit ramp. The truck's engine note changed as we decelerated, the rain now falling more heavily against the windshield. The town's lights grew brighter, promising safety in their warm glow. As we pulled into a well-lit gas station, my passenger gathered his bag with practiced efficiency. "Thanks for the ride," he said, stepping out into the rain. I watched in the mirror as he walked away, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared into the darkness beyond the station's lights. Starting the engine again, I pulled back onto the highway, the familiar vibrations resuming their comforting rhythm. The rain continued its gentle pattern, and the dashboard clock ticked over to 3:45 a.m. In the distance, lightning flickered silently, illuminating the clouds. I never saw my passenger again, but sometimes on rainy nights, when I'm driving my regular route, I think about that journey. About the metallic glint in his bag, the careful way he held himself, the tension in his voice when the news came on. About the choices we make in the darkness and the stories we tell ourselves afterward. The road stretches endlessly before me, a ribbon of possibilities in the night. The engine hums its steady song, the rain plays its gentle melody, and somewhere in the darkness, other stories are unfolding on other highways, beneath other rainy skies.